Members of this panel include Louis Yo Afo, Ridwan Oleyede, Bidemi Olumide, Chima Ozuzu, and Chinedu Anaje. Now, a brief introduction of our moderator, Uwem Atakbo Jr., a qualified lawyer with significant experience in the legal sector. He has advised a variety of clients on issues relating to data protection in Nigeria, and he has also carried out multiple data protection compliance audits for various clients spanning different sectors, including but not limited to financial services, insurance, power, hospitality, oil and gas, banking, real estate. He has also advised a wide array of clients on various general legal and compliance issues in the corporate and commercial space, including but not limited to matters on private equity, capital reorganization, regulatory compliance, corporate governance, and employment. He has demonstrated a fantastic history in company sectors. Now, with a digital round of applause, let's make welcome Uwem Atakbo as he moderates this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever in the world you're joining us today, and welcome to today's session of the second Africa Data Security Conclave. I hope we all enjoyed yesterday's session, or yesterday's sessions rather, excuse me, as today's sessions promise to be even as enlightening. The topic for this session is the Africa Continental Trade and Cross-Border Personal Data Transfer, its impacts, implementation, and challenges. And we have distinguished personalities on the panel for this session. Okay, on this panel, we have Bidemi Olumide. Bidemi is an NDPR and EU GDPR certified privacy rights practitioner. He's a lawyer of about 15 years post-call experience in Nigeria and the African markets. Bidemi brings to bear core executive and managerial skills in helping clients navigate the complexities of data protection and global privacy rights in general. He's overseen the implementation of both the NDPR and EU GDPR at various corporate, individual, and governmental levels, with effectiveness, efficiency, and commerce at the center of his intervention. Bidemi is the lead partner of the commercial and criminal law practice at AO2 and the CEO at TaxAid and TaxTech, the chief conveners of the Africa Data Protection Company. Right. Next, we have Ridwan Oleyede. Ridwan is the co-founder of Tech Hive Advisory. He advises the global aspect of information technology policy, data protection and privacy laws, digital health, and digital ethics. He also advises on rolling out new and disruptive technologies, data governance, and cybersecurity laws. Ridwan is a fellow of information privacy with the International Association of Privacy Professionals, IAPP, and a research fellow at the African Academic Network on Internet Policy. You're welcome, Ridwan. On the panel, we also have Chinedu Anaje. Chinedu is a target-driven, goal-oriented, and passionate commercial litigator and arbitrator who has an untiring zeal to always exceed his clients' expectations. He's passionate about excellence and offers cutting-edge specialized that add value to the client's businesses. Chinedu specializes in commercial and corporate litigation and arbitration and has litigated on an extensive range of issues. You're welcome, Chinedu. On the panel, we also have Chima Ozuzu. Chima is a senior auditor and risk assurance professional with over 6 years of relevant experience offering audit attestation, compliance, and investigation services to multinational organizations in the financial services, oil and gas, and consumer market industries across Africa and even globally. He's a certified IS auditor, that's information security auditor, data privacy solutions engineer, and a fraud examiner. He's also a certified ISO 27701 Privacy Information Management Systems Lead Implementer. He has a passion for building internal organization capacity for data protection and risk management. Chima considers himself a global citizen and cherishes any opportunity to impact his society positively. Also on this panel, we have Louis Yor Afu. Louis is an executive director, AfCFTA Policy Network. He is an international trade practitioner and an AfCFTA expert. He contributed immensely to the consultative process of the AfCFTA agreement and was also recognized by the Chief Technical Advisor of the AfCFTA Trade Unit of the African Union as championing the cause of the AfCFTA on the continent. He graduated in social sciences with strong private sector innovation, strategies, and specialization. Thank you very much, Louis, for joining our session today. So we will go straight into it. So the AfCFTA was derailed in the first quarter of the year. It promised to make Africa a market, which is a market of about 1.2 billion Africans with a combined GDP of $2.5 trillion. It had a goal of implementing that for Africa. It also has a goal to project the size of Africa's economy to 29 trillion by 2050. It's projected to increase intra-African trade by up to 52.3%, and it's also projected to increase export diversification, create durable, sustained growth, and enlarge a market that will attract large volume of foreign direct investment with bigger economic space for industrialization and structural transformations around the continent. In relation to today's conversation, however, we've been focusing so much on the AfCFTA itself, and we've not talked about the digital aspect of the AfCFTA. For one of the operational instruments that underpins AfCFTA's implementation is the online negotiating forum, which is a virtual forum to facilitate discussions on protocol following the meetings between the members. Another digital aspect of the AfCFTA is that it monitors digital payment systems, as well as the configuration of a secure Pan-African system for receiving, settling, and processing payments made within Africa. The AfCFTA also provides for the African Trade Observatory, which is a digital dashboard with trade statistics and information to enable cross-national comparisons and guide market participants, as well as to monitor progress. Now, the e-commerce aspect of the AfCFTA poses a number of risks which go beyond privacy violations. Privileged access and control over data can lead to a firm's and even a country's competitive advantage, as data has an economic value in this century and is an intangible capital asset. Now, data regulation concerns would need to be addressed when negotiating trade agreements in order to ensure fairness and non-discrimination. While the AfCFTA offers many promises for economic growth and prosperity, there are still important factors that need to be addressed in order to make this treaty profitable and beneficial to all Africans. Now, one of the major obstacles we face or we're looking at in the implementation of the AfCFTA is the implementation of data protection laws by African countries. In comparison with the EU GDPR, the number of African countries that have implemented a data protection regulation is really low. Now, we've seen the impact that EU GDPR has had in Europe, with countries in other continents actually copying the formula and implementation style of the EU GDPR. While Africa has not been left out, the rate of implementation is still low to a very large extent. Now, one of the issues that needs to be addressed in relation to data governance is the sharing of personal data among countries in Africa. Using Nigeria as a case study, NIDA, which is the National Information Technology Development Agency, the sector regulator for data protection in Nigeria, has a white list of countries where it has given approval for personal data to be transferred to without any further approvals. Now, these countries on NIDA's white list are actually or have actually been proven to have a large extent of data protection laws and security policies in place. And NIDA accordingly has determined that personal data can be transferred to these countries without further approval. Now, this list contains about 47 countries. The funny thing about the list is, out of the 47 countries, there are only 5 African countries that are listed with appropriate data security laws and practices in place. Now, looking at the way the AfCFTA is to be implemented, that is not an encouraging rate at all. Now, on the number of issues that need to be addressed in relation to the data governance issues that arise out of the implementation of the AfCFTA is the description of data governance as well as scope of applicability and regional approach, guidelines for how data should be used ethically, investigation procedure for reporting cybercrime, coordination or investigation reports, as well as intelligence exchange. Laws and regulations to tax digital transactions and online consumer protection in a coordinated way, as well as regulating cross-border payments in different currencies across Africa in digital currencies. Now, the AfCFTA also envisages a situation where personal data, as well as people from different African countries are able to move from one country to another within Africa, that is. Now, because people are moving from one country to another, it also means that personal data will be transferred from one country to another. That also gives rise to the reason why personal data security should also be an area of concern in the implementation of the AfCFTA. Even though the AfCFTA may not solve all the issues associated with the data governance, its positive impact and better coordination of economic issues allow the AfCFTA to play a significant role in African countries' adoption and implementation of data security practices. So I would throw some questions on the issues to the members of the panel. I think I would start with Bidemi Olumide. Okay, Bidemi, please, I'd like to ask, how applicable are the current data protection laws to trans-border trade?
Hi, can you hear me, Wim?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, good morning from Nigeria. Thanks for the background. Thanks for the question as well. So I see a sort of a conundrum, even in the question itself, because when you say trans-border trade, right? I guess the very first thing we need to, or clearly appreciate is that the cloud or the digital space, as it were, is relatively borderless. So our transactions in themselves are really not crossing borders, so to say. I guess the best way to look at it is that we are transacting between entities or between individuals who are resident in different jurisdictions. So I think the transactions are not really what are transborder. What is really transborder is the domicile of the relevant persons, that we are dealing with. So I think the best way, you want to put it is this. I would not want to do data-related transactions with someone who is resident in a jurisdiction where I cannot guarantee the security of whatever information or whatever transaction I have undertaken. So it puts it really that I want to be sure that you are in a jurisdiction with adequate laws to protect my transaction. I would not want to share the data, that is available to me in Nigeria with a counterparty who is resident in a jurisdiction that I cannot account and satisfy myself that the laws that are applicable in its territory, let's not forget that maybe by contract, we could agree on the applicable laws or the governing law of our transaction. But be that as it may, you still need the municipal laws or the jurisdictional laws that are present in that jurisdiction to govern a significant part of the transaction. So to answer your question directly, to the extent that not all countries in Africa currently have adequate laws in place, then clearly we'll say it's inadequate. Our work in Africa is essentially to mobilize all the jurisdictions as much as possible, that all the 55 countries have adequate laws in place that ensures and guarantees the sanctity of transactions, essentially data-related transactions. And I think it's very important to also put it in perspective that data protection becomes a subset of the larger conversations around data security. Yes, the laws are there to protect the individuals and the personal data that is being transmitted, from person to person. But then, I'm just like the POPIA in South Africa has done, the conversation now has also now extended to corporate data. So it's really not personal data alone. So essentially what you should be looking at, what we should be looking at is that we're looking at our jurisdictions and we're trying to satisfy ourselves that in each of these jurisdictions, the adequate work that needs to be done is being done. And we have enough laws, enough institutions, and I think maybe I'll speak to that maybe on the second attempt you give me to speak to, that we have enough institutions working the laws. It's one thing for you to have the laws in place, is another thing for you to have institutions that are adequately resourced to implement those laws. So as of today, clearly maybe we're about 50%. With just barely over 30 countries in Africa having some data protection and data security laws in place. There is still a long way to go, at least in the lawmaking process. But the greater challenge really is in the institution building process. How many institutions in each of the jurisdictions in Africa are adequately resourced to even implement the laws that are currently in place? So to answer your question again, we're certainly not, there's certainly a great case of inadequacy. And I guess that's the whole essence of this conversation, to ensure that all that needs to be put in place, we're working to put it in place. It's easier said than done. There's always a lot of talk really around, but then the amount of work, the amount of efforts that need to be put in it, I like to use the word, the blood, sweat, and tears that needs to flow for these things to happen is better imagined really than actualized. So I give it to the rest of the panel to also answer some part of the question. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Demi. Since we are talking about data protection laws, I believe Mr. Najer would also like to comment on the applicability of data protection laws to transborder trade.
Yeah, good morning. Wem, thank you so much. Good morning to fellow panelists. I think I want to look at that question, from three perspectives. One has to do with applicability. Two has to do with the adequacy of the available laws at the moment. And three, the issue of what I may refer to as institutional enforcement. So on the applicability, at the moment, so taking a clip from what you have in Nigeria, the NDPR of 2019, with respect to applicability, I would probably say that, yeah, there are some provisions in that regulation that refer to or has in contemplation the possibility of cross-border data movement. Now, particularly with reference to, if you look at the provisions of Article 2.6 that talks about data security, that provision actually places some responsibility on you as the data controller on what you need to do when you are in control of data from a data subject. So one can say in terms of applicability, well, there's something on ground. It may not be adequate anyway, but there's something on ground. So what that means is that there's need, just like Bidevi said, for us to put in more effort to ensure that the gap created by the inadequacy is actually closed up. Now, if you look at there are other provisions in the NDPR that actually deals with, or rather envisages the possibility of cross-border data transfer, particularly Article 2.11 that talks about transfer of to foreign entities, right? So if you look at the gamut of some of those provisions, one probably may say, yes, those provisions actually envisage that, look, it should be applicable. And you talked about a white paper that has a list of countries, all right? But again, it's sad also to note that out of those countries we mentioned, you have just 3 African countries. It's worrisome. So there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of work to be done in that regard. So I would rather say that in terms of, in respect to applicability, yeah, perhaps, yeah, we have laws. And when I mean we, I mean Nigeria, because I know that there are a lot of other African countries who are state parties, who are today do not have even laws or regulations with respect to personal data, or even what you may call corporate data, right? Then on the aspect of institutional enforcement, there's also a need for that to happen. Now, what I mean by institutional enforcement is this. Yeah, those laws are made, those regulations are made, but again, we need institutions to drive them. So if we're looking at the free trade area as an opportunity to galvanize the African trade, the regional trade, and also to create those opportunities and benefits, we also need to ensure that there are institutions that will drive these laws and regulations relating to data transfer from one jurisdiction to the other. Because the truth of the matter is that if you look at the large volume of trade that the free trade area will provide, or rather is currently providing, you can't take away the issue of movement of personal data or even corporate data away from the gamut of the entire arrangement. So it is very, very important that we sit down as a continent to be able to look at these issues. They are very fundamental in the current digital economy, that we currently find ourselves. You can't take that out of the equation. So I would rather say, with respect to applicability, yes, speaking to the terms, the provisions of the NDPR, we have some provisions. Adequacy, no. Then in terms of enforcement, it's still a very huge gap. So we need to bridge that gap. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Najee, for your contribution. So we can't talk about data protection and trans-border trade without having contributions from other jurisdictions. So I'll be calling on Louis to also give us his contribution. Good morning, Louis. Thank you for joining us. Hi, Louis. Sorry, I think your mic is muted. Hi, Louis, if you can hear us, your mic is muted, please.
Is it better now? Sorry.
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Good morning to everyone. Good morning to co-panelists. And thank you for the opportunity. I think that my initial comment on data protection laws in respect to African continental free trade will stem from just two areas. One, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is not on its own, it's an organ. The Secretariat is an organ of the African Union. The African Union has its data and cybersecurity regulations or protocols as far back as 2014, and in its strategic plan, and has recommended member states to implement certain guidelines which covers various scopes. So it's up to the member states to enforce these laid down principles and guidelines. With respect to the African Continental Free Trade, some of it will be seen as key features in the upcoming protocol on digital trade. It's no more called e-commerce, it's going to be digital trade, because under that, you're going to have all e-commerce as part, electronic contracts, etc. And so if you look at national laws are very important, because if you take certain various member states' national laws, they will have to have a way of having it embedded in the continental regulations and principles. If that is not the case, it is going to be very difficult. Again, you also realize that that protocol that is supposed to be established has not yet seen daylight. It's still under negotiation, the protocol on digital trade. Now, one key issue that we need to understand is that all these ones will have an interplay with trade-in services, which is already in force. And the trade-in service is going to have a whole lot of financial institutions, you're going to have financial bodies, you're going to have telecoms, you're going to have ICT, all as part of the bodies under our sectors under trade-in services. The issue or the only difference is under the continental free trade, trade-in services, you're not going to have it like the trading goods, where goods and capital can move freely borders without any restrictions or without trade restrictions or trade barrier. With this trade-in services, it's going to be based upon national interest and what we call acceptance mechanism. That is, it's not all the countries that have liberalized their trading services sector. And then the services sector, you're going to have data protection as one, or data security as one. Most of them is going to be based upon country by country openness and acceptance. For example, if maybe Kenya and South Africa feel that, oh no, we cannot allow deregulation easily, but maybe I would like to trade off in the area of tourism, you would like to trade off in the area of maybe when it comes to ICT issues or data issues. It's not going to be all standards for all the member states. And that is one of the issues I'm sure that they will have to look at and address, because they are not all opening up in those areas. Therefore, it factors in that if such is going to be the mechanism, then it's going to be that you're going to have various forms of data protection laws that might not be harmonized. And when we don't harmonize it, it's just like rules and standardization. It becomes difficult in terms of its operationalization. And so my initial comments are that we should look at the African Union's own cybersecurity regulations. We should also look at what AfCFTA is currently undertaking to finalize the protocol on digital trading. We should also come back to the trading services and make certain adjustments so that countries can open up, deregulate their systems just exactly as they did for the trading goods. That's my initial comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louis, for your able contribution. Now, the next question we have arising from this topic is, given the large amounts of data transfer, I believe this question will be going to Chima. Okay, I'll just explain why after I've asked the question. So given the large amount of data transfer that will be involved in trans-border trading, is the continent equipped enough to prevent personal data from being accessed by the wrong personnel? So the reason why I ask this question is your background in audit and risk assurance. So Chima, all right, you have the floor. Hi Chima, sorry, I think we have some. Hi Chima, can you hear us? Yeah, but we're having some interference from your end. Okay, so while we are still waiting for Chima. Hi Chima. Later. Yeah, while we're still waiting for Chima to fix.
I guess
Yes,
Chima might
internet.
need to log out. I guess Chima might need to log out and log back in, if that's possible.
All right. So we would just address the question to Mr. Lonnie. Ridwan.
All right, can you please take the question again? Yeah, can you take the question again?
Okay. So given the large amount of data transfer that would be involved in trans-border trading, do you think Africa is equipped enough to
Do I think Africa is, you say big enough?
personal data from being accessed by the wrong personnel? Equipped enough.
Okay, equipped enough. All right.
Yes.
All right, yeah, thanks for that. What I think is personally from our own from the last mapping, what we see is about 32 African countries who now have some sort of comprehensive data protection law. And there are a couple of other countries with some semblance of it. And of those 32 countries that is mentioned, there are about 19 of them who have set up some sort of authority to enforce those laws. So what you see is across these different countries, and I think that's like way better. I mean, that's more than half of the that's more than half of the countries on the continent already, which I think is a way better representation of the state of affairs than what it was about a decade ago. And so what I think is, or what I know is that across all of these countries that we mentioned, the strength of the laws, it's sort of variegated. We have countries with laws that date back as, so the first law we had in Africa was in 2001, and that was in Cape Verde. Subsequently, in that first decade, we had a couple of other laws as well. And we have countries who still use laws from that very first decade. I mean, Morocco, Tunisia, their laws have not been amended to say. And what this means is some of these provisions of the laws are no longer reflective of the modern trend, the risk, the digital, I mean, the modern spin to the digital trade, which definitely means, again, we're playing in a space where we have a variegated strength of laws. Also, if you also look at the strength of the authorities, I mean, from the Modernized Convention 108 to the Malabo Convention, that's the African Union Convention itself, to even some of these continental regional laws, you see EAC, cyber laws, and even the ECOWAS Supplementary Act. There's some sort of emphasis on having independent supervisory authority to actually enforce the laws. And what you see so far is so many authorities are either subsumed under either as part of the executive, or you have part of the executive arm of the government making up part of the agency itself, or probably even subsumed under the office of the Prime Minister or Presidency. Summary of what I'm saying is we're contending in a space where first we have variegated data protection framework. We're also dealing with some countries who don't have a data protection framework. We're also contending with countries who have a data protection framework who are yet to set up their data protection authority. So when you look at the landscape from that point of view, you see it's variegated, which definitely means that the kind of protection you'd enjoy in a country differs. But beyond that, we're also thinking about what has been the state of cooperation between even the few ones who have data protection authorities. So there is a body that represents data protection authorities in Africa, one for the French-speaking parts of, who is like bigger part of the French-speaking countries in Africa. But generally, there is one that is like some sort of a body that represents data protection authorities in Africa, where they do quite a number of cooperations and collaborations. But out of all these countries, you've only see a country like Morocco, for example, Tunisia, Nigeria, who have deemed it fit to say, okay, we're actually issuing some sort of an adequacy measure on a couple of other African countries. And in Morocco's case, Morocco didn't actually mention any African country. Tunisia had a couple of African countries on its own list. Nigeria has quite a number of African countries on the list, including those who have signed the Malabo Convention. So this is the twist. Think of the spin in Nigeria's case, because one thing we need to first establish is to protect the digital, to play safely in the digital space, or when it comes to digital trade, we need data to move around. That's one thing we need to establish. I'm not a very big fan of localization of data. Data needs to move around for us to trade, for us to engage. And you can't on one hand say you want to build a digital economy, and on one hand you're saying data should stay at home locally. But outside of that, we're also talking about a situation where what you think of all of these countries that we're talking about. Look at the Nigerian measure, for example. It issued, like I said, signatories to the African Union Convention. Signatories to the African Convention, not even those who have ratified the convention. There are quite a number of countries on those who are, those countries who are signatories who are yet to actually have a data protection law. Then you look at the basis of even giving the whitelist decision itself. Did the regulator itself even comply with its own rules? Nigeria itself is not even a signatory to that convention. So why are you making such decision, which is actually like, it raises a lot of questions. I know there's a particular non-profit body who is actually challenging NIDA on that front as it relates to international data, international transfer of data, because not only does it impugn the perception of other countries around being able to determine if the measures are adequate enough or what is being done in a country like that. Summary to the risk question you've asked is, if we're doing an assessment whether there is readiness, I don't think there is readiness for so many reasons that I've stated before. And in ensuring this conversation too, I think it's very important to also mention the role of like consumer protection framework, which I think is also a very strong part of the digital trade protocol that's currently being negotiated. Yeah, so yeah, that's it.
All right, thank you very much, Ridwan. So Chima, I don't know if you are now stable.
Yes, I am.
All right, thank you very much.
Yes, sorry, apologies for that. Thanks. So good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thanks for joining. I noticed that I'm the only person on this panel without a legal background, so permit my legal ignorance. Okay, so the question that has been posed has to do around the volume of data, right, that will be involved in transborder trading. And if we as the continent, we are ready or we are equipped enough to prevent the accessibility by the wrong personnel. So here is how I see this question. Wrong personnel is a bit subjective. You wouldn't know what the intent of the data assessor is, the person who is assessing this data, until after this data has been assessed. Now, a lot of the speakers here have spoken about the frameworks that exist across Africa, including what we have in Nigeria, the NDPR. And Ridwan particularly mentioned that, if you look at the NDPR, there's a white list that has 3 African countries and then the signatories of the Malabo Convention, which covers quite a number of the other African countries that have been omitted. But he also noted that in some of these signatories to the Malabo Convention, right, we have some countries that still don't have a regulatory body. So I think what is most concerning to me in terms of the accessibility of the data and kind of control that we have is channeled more around the reporting structure. Do we have a structure across the continent that enables people to report when their data has been accessed by who they seem or who they deem to be the wrong personnel? And the answer to that is no. we've noted that some of these countries do not have a body that is responsible for it. And that is something that is fundamental in ensuring that the rights of the data subjects across the member countries of AfCFTA are protected and adequately monitored. Now you have situations where, look at the EU, for example. Let's take a leaf from the book in GDPR. So you have a uniform data regulation that covers the 27 member states of the EU. And, so the policies are the same, the obligations, the framework, the standards, they are uniform across these member states. But you see, there is the enforcement that is done on a local level, on the state level. And so what that means is that if you're in Luxembourg, for example, and there is a breach of the data subject rights in Luxembourg, you cannot run to Switzerland and seek refuge, because the same laws that would apply in terms of data protection in Switzerland would apply in Luxembourg, will apply in the other 27 member states of the EU. The AfCFTA is supposed to give a Pan-African approach to trade, right? And we are talking so much about the digital trade economy of Africa, which we all know right now isn't the best. We are still scaling, we're still at the startup phase with e-commerce coming into play, a lot of digitization happening across board, yeah? But then we do not have, there seems to be this omission of the rights of the data subjects in the conversations around the AfCFTA for some reason. And it's very conspicuous, but everybody can see. You're talking about me trading freely with countries in Northern Africa, in Central Africa, in Southern Africa, from where I stay in West Africa. But then you're not speaking about how my rights are protected in those jurisdictions. Given some of these organizations, or some of these countries rather, have the laws, right? But then it's one thing to have the law, it's one thing to monitor it. In Africa, we know that we have an abundance of laws. We don't have issues with laws. Every day our lawmakers sit down and they come up with one thing. And something might just change, from in split seconds. But then what happens is you're changing these laws, you're making these fantastic amendments to your regulations, but then the mechanisms for enforcement, the mechanisms for reporting and monitoring are absent. That conversation is not there. And so if you ask me if we have what it takes to prevent this personal data from being accessed by the wrong personnel. Now, wrong personnel, like I've stated, is subjective. I would say no. And for the various reasons that we have mentioned since morning. And I think that if we must continue with this conversation of moving the AfCFTA to the next phase of implementation, we need to start from yesterday to talk about the conversations around how the data subject rights will be protected across this jurisdiction. I wouldn't be comfortable thinking that I want to trade in Rwanda, for example, or to trade somewhere in Morocco, and then I'm not sure how my data is being used. You can just go to any website of an organization or an e-commerce. The global e-commerce stations that we have here in Africa, and you try to log on or try to put in your details to register to get an account details, and you see how that information about how my rights are protected is missing. I'm not aware. And then you also have the language barrier that permeates across the member states. Ridwan had mentioned that we have some sort of collaborative efforts happening in the continent where you have the majorly French-speaking countries aligning together and the majorly English-speaking countries aligning together in Africa just to push that conversation of data protection. But as it stands, as of today, we cannot see much traction. And I mean, it's troubling to me as an individual, and probably as someone who has advised and being consulted by some of these organizations, most of them being large organizations that trade multilaterally. You have some of the people that we work with are people who are from different countries, even outside the continent. And some of their fear is that, they are very reluctant about trading in Africa because you cannot say what the framework is for monitoring and reporting these breaches. Yes, we've seen some traction in Nigeria. I think about 2 or 3 settled cases. There's a recent one that happened about, I think, a loan shark well, I won't call them a loan shark, but an organization that gives loans to people, and then they are contacting someone who has been given, whose details have been given to them as a shortee. Maybe it wasn't even given to them in the first place, but they got access to that data, and then the person who is giving the loan has defaulted, and instead of going after that person, you're going after this other person. And it's just, there's just that ambiguity that it creates. And they were slammed with a fine of 10 million, I think, and it made the news. But then that is just the start of it. Now, having those people being pursued by the regulators is good and fantastic, and we applaud them for that. But we are not addressing the root of the issue. What exactly do we have in place to properly monitor that these data rights are protected across these jurisdictions, and then also to report it to the relevant authorities? If the breach happens in a regulation or in a jurisdiction where you don't have a regulatory body, what then do I do? I'm left at the mercy of whoever it is that has gotten my data and is using it for God knows what. So there has to be that conversation to ensure that if you're going to be a member state of the AfCFTA, you're going to ratify it and going to implement it in your jurisdiction, those protocols that need to be put in place in terms of data protection, personal data protection, and even corporate data protection need to be first and foremost. They need to be in the forefront. And then we can then go into the conversation of how we can effectively monitor this transborder trade, this transborder transfer across the member states and report them. And we can then rely on a framework that ensures that when we report, there is the necessary action that is taken. We can talk about how generally there's this perception that if you look at the penalties and the fines that are placed on data breaches here, they do not seem to be much of a deterrent to people who want to perpetrate this act. And that's something that we could think about going forward. But right now, I feel like there's a long way. We have a lot more to do in getting to where we need to be to ensure that the data that we have, the personal data of the data subjects in the various jurisdictions across the member states of the AfCFTA are adequately protected. And not just being protected, are these data subjects also informed of what their law, what their rights are in this jurisdiction? If I'm doing something in another country, what exactly is my rights there? Who do I report to if something happens? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Shima, for that very elaborate presentation. Right, so we would move on to the next talking point. Now, the question here is, what impacts can data regulations have on trading under the AfCFTA? So I'll bring this question back to Mr. Olumide.
Okay, thanks, Uwem. I think Luis said, I think it will be a confluence of Luis and Ridwan's intervention as well. I mean, practically all interventions actually, Chinedu's and Chima as well. I think that that question, permit me to say, probably has been overflowed. But I mean, allow me to quickly, and maybe to answer your question directly, of course, it's going to have a significant impact. I mean, no one really wants to trade with a counterpart in a jurisdiction without adequate laws to protect the whole essence of the transaction. So that answers the question. But allow me to quickly segue into, the concepts of the protocol on digital trade, which if Luis will concur with me, it's an offshoot from the protocol in trade and services, as it were. We're all eagerly looking forward to that. That the whole negotiation can actually be speeded up. In Africa, it's really not been, it's not really been our strongest point when it comes to decision making, when it comes to negotiating agreements, and when it comes to execution. Permit me to say that pace at which things it's in the current global scheme is rather really worrisome. And my prayer, lawyers pray a lot. My prayer is that on the auspices of the on the AfCFTA or on the larger framework of the AU, that these things are really taken frontally and all actions really are speeded up, and we are able to have, migrate from a point of having conversations to giving reports on execution, right? Ideas are a dime a dozen, as some of us would say. It's really in terms of execution that things really get done. So, for example, it will be very important that the core principles of the Malabo Convention, as it were, is actually ingrained in the entire framework of the AfCFTA, particularly in the protocol on digital trade. I mean, much of part 2 of that convention that really talks about the principles for digital services or digital trade, as it were, I mean, is actually incorporated into whatever that is being put together in the protocol in digital trade. Again, there's no need reinventing the wheel. A lot of the principles, a lot of the processes that needs to have been talked about and be put in place are already there. It's just for us to act. That said, in terms of the Continental organization, in terms of the Continental collaboration, so I think that deals with that. But I think more importantly for me is it's being able to stratify how these things really work in the real world. Yes. So while we have the organization at the continental level, I mean, among countries, among governments, speaking to themselves, I mean, taking all the time they want, we cascade it a bit down. So the conversations within regional governments, I mean, sub-regional governments, or conversations within municipal authorities, the countries themselves, and what they really want to do. But then I think generally, right, that what at the end of the day catalyzes the entire conversation, whether at the sub-regional level, at the regional level, at the continental level, really, and I think that point was also very well flogged, I think in the first panel, the first session yesterday, it's actually the action of business. Again, the private sector. I dare say that, and I think Femi said that eloquently very well yesterday, that much of the progress we have been able to achieve in Nigeria in terms of the conversations around data security, the relative mass awareness, and all of that, I mean, sprang from, from the ingenious move of the former minister of, or rather the former leadership of NIDA to say that, look, in this data protection conversation, as it were, don't forget that we have kind of taken the conversation more now to the broader spectrum of data security. What NIDA really did then, Dr. Pantani, then was to say, look, we need a public-private partnership to drive this. And then they came up with the ingenious concept of the DPCO concept. And I like this, and I would say that really was a master stroke that really helped Nigeria. Because if you had left it to government alone to regulate this and all of that, certainly it would have been not at the pace at which it has. So that infusion of business, for example, i.e. the DPCO move and all of that, I think could also still be taken a bit further. So if businesses, for example, come amongst themselves, yes, we call them data controllers, to adopt certain protocols, to adopt certain pledges, to adopt certain practices amongst themselves, I think it further engenders the conversation. Never forget, government is always late to the party. They're always the last to come into the party. It takes business, it takes culture to move the conversation. And I think that's, Senator said that much at the second panel yesterday. We need to find a way to catalyze the culture, the conversations from the level of business, and then see it develop. So for example, if as a business, I tell you, I'm not going to do any business with you, because then, I mean, you told me what your website is and all of that. I go to your website and I can't see a privacy policy on your website. I basically we're telling you, guy, businessman, you probably are living in the 20th century or in the 19th century. I'm in the 21st century. Can you come up to my level? Because I can't see you understanding or being able to speak the language I want to speak. Now, if that, for example, becomes a business culture, where businesses will only interact with businesses that have shown some level of compliance, some level of understanding of what the issues really are, probably we could see maybe a change in even how government eventually reacts. Don't forget that it's always policy, law, administration. But before policy, permit me to say, comes culture, comes the practices. So if the practice amongst the businesses that, for example, are part of this, of the conclave this year, to say that, look, we really want to take leadership around this thing, because yes, with COVID and with with COVID and everything that has happened since March 2020, it's very clear to us that the predominance of our businesses are actually digital. Everything we're doing here, the entire conclave here is a testament to the fact that, the world really, in terms of delivery of goods, in terms of delivery of services and all of that, is largely digital. So it simply means that there is what you call the digital speak. There is what you call the digital culture. Yes, and data security and the security of the data that is being transmitted in the digital space is, we lawyers, we call it a sine qua non. That's a condition precedent for us to even have a conversation. So in other words, just as you would have it in the terrestrial, terrestrially, where I'm not going to come into your space unless I know that probably there's a fence around your house, there are some security around your premises, my vehicle can be securely parked in your premises and all of that. So also, am I saying that I'm not going to do any digital transaction with you unless you can guarantee me that, one, you have some very good security practices within your business, either as a business, but more importantly, and which is what this conversation is about, as enforced by your government, and as enforced by the laws of your jurisdiction. So yes, we could have a contractual agreement that yes, you have to have all of this in place, but then it also gives me further assurance that your government in the jurisdiction where you are dealing with me, already also does have some sort of that protection in place. So in summary, I think that whilst I think somebody has said probably we take it from the top to bottom approach, I want to differ a bit, or I want to start a new conversation that probably we take it from the bottom up. Let the businesses lead the change. Let them lead the conversations. For example, in Nigeria, we're lucky enough that our government has sort of set the tone. Our data protection regulation came out about barely 6 months after the EU GDPR came into force. So let's take the advantage of that privilege to also, to become a central part of how we do business amongst ourselves in Africa. And probably we could see a change between this year, next year, when every business here present says, look, I'm not going to do business with you if Esther is listening from yesterday, with due respect to Esther from Tanzania, I'm not going to do business between Tanzania if I know, Esther, that you don't have, it's either we don't have a contract in place that can ensure that whatever data, whatever information we're transmitting between ourselves is secured, or that your government has been able to put some very good statutory measures in place to protect the sanctity of our transactions. So let me leave it at that. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Lumide. It's only right to have contributions from another jurisdiction. So I'll be throwing this question to Louis as well. Hello, Louis.
Yes, I'm with you.
Okay.
Yes.
So the question is, I'm just repeating the question that Mr. Olumide just addressed. What impacts can data regulations have on trading under the AfCFTA?
Yes, I share opinion with all that has been discussed. But as I said, we need to look at it from the protocol that is yet to be enacted, because it is from the protocol that coming from the Secretariat itself that will tell how far it will go, because mind you, all that has been happening is not done by African Union in isolation. It's done by the member states. The member states have represented their people, their trade negotiators, their technical experts, and what have you. And so each country who represented at the negotiation table will have based certain information on what is happening within their national jurisdiction. And that is why I shared the opinion of, I think, Mr. Bidemi, that it should start from the grassroots approach, bottom up, because one of the reasons Nigeria was not able to sign to the AfCFTA on time is not because Nigeria was not ready. Nigeria delayed because at the time that the document or it was sent to the president for presidential ascension, a lot of trade unions rose up, stakeholders rose up and said, look, we don't know anything about AfCFTA. We have no idea. We have not made any contribution. We want it, hold it, don't sign now. And so if you remember, may God keep his soul, the late Ambassador Chiedu Osakwe, who was Nigeria's trade negotiator, had to start all over again by going around the country, meeting stakeholders, meeting everyone before, when it was finally accepted and ratified by your federal parliament, it was now assented. The same way, currently, the protocol that is going to be on digital trading, there is the need for that bottom-up approach with the people, private sector, stakeholders to add their input to what is happening. Then at the national level, it will be negotiated before this protocol comes to sea life. The impact is going to be important because I am not a data expert. I'm a trade practitioner, but the little I know, if we involve the private sector, let's take just the telcos, for example. In Ghana, we have a data protection law at 2012, which stipulates private individual protection, it stipulates corporate and what have you. And it made it clear that as private individual, your data, you have the right to report any breach. Let's take the telcos, for example, as one of the carriers of data. Let's take them, for example. They can really be helpful if really they make certain inputs. Most of them are multinational. Recently, we wake up to hear a lot of cables leaked. Cables leaked. Recently, we woke up to hear WhatsApp was down, Facebook was down, and so and so forth. And Facebook had a lot of business operations cut across the globe. How secure even our data? How secure during times of political governance, election times, sometimes even within the media landscape? How secure our data? So I'm saying that yes, apart from the continental negotiations, individual member states, what is the state of your data protection laws? How is it being implemented? You have any right when there is breach? These are areas we have to look at. If we are able to answer these ones, then whatever law that is going to be enacted, the impact is going to be either positive or negative, because we are translating the policy, the data laws onto businesses as well. That is why it is very difficult in Africa to have consumers have their protection rights really, really given daylight. because a lot of breaches even start from data. And so I'm the view that as we leave this webinar, we need to have an retrospect to our national authorities responsible for data law to find out where we are. Where are we on the Continental as well? Then we'll be able to start all over again if we have not, to do the sensitization, to do more on the advocacy for people to really understand what is happening. Because mind you, sometimes don't we realize you receive messages onto your phones without you asking them? The lawyers will tell us better. Do they have the right to send you messages without your approval? Sometimes you wake up and you see on your phone all manner of messages, text messages from various companies, advertising. They have not sought even your view, you have not sought your permission. What is the law saying about that? Or we just brush it under the carpet? No. These are some of the various things that we have to really take into consideration before, what are the remedies for breach? All these things will go into business circles. And I think that private sector is key here. They must engage public institutions. They must engage governments. They must engage so that they have their voice will be heard before final announcements are undertaken. Other than that, we all wake up one day and we only hear laws have been passed, we are supposed to follow. It doesn't work that way. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Louis. So at this point, I'd just like to let our audience know that if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and subsequently we'll the panelists will address same. Thank you very much. Now, moving on to the next question. I think this question, I'll direct it to Mr. Anaje. Right, so the question is, are there any current implementation strategies in place for protecting cross-border data transfer as regards interregional trade?
Thank you so much, Uwem. And I think a lot has been said from the interventions from fellow panelists. Trying to answer your question directly. Yes, there are a lot that that are currently going on, but as to again, with reference to what I said with respect to the adequacy, I probably would say that also is a whole lot of work. Now, I'm fully aware that apart from the Malabo Convention and all of that, the Free Trade Agreement Trading Services, the protocol, all right, speaks to all of these efforts towards ensuring that we have some kind of protection around movement of data, whether personal or corporate. And again, if you look specifically at the provisions of Article 15 of the trade agreement, that also answers the question as to whether efforts are being made, in that regard to be able to ensure that there are strategies in place. But more importantly, I think I want to speak specifically on issues of, the routing of the strategy. And what I mean by routing of the strategy is, so there are efforts being made, but again, how galvanized, how harmonized are those efforts? Now, I want to speak to this from two major perspectives. The very first one, I mean, a lot of what we've said in the course of the intervention speaks to two major things: the issue of jurisdictional effort from different state party members, and also from the continental, perspective. So speaking about the jurisdictional effort, so for individual state parties, the question is, what are those laws? What are those regulations with respect to protection of either personal data or corporate data? Because like I said in my first, when I spoke initially, you can't take away the issue of movement of data because it is pivotal. It is at the center of even the success of that trade agreement, free trade agreement, that Africa as a continent wants to harness the enormous possibilities that it affords. So you can't take away that issue. But again, we ask ourselves, what effort are the countries making? Currently, we have about 54, 55 member states. So how many of them have actually ratified even the agreement? I'm sorry, even laws. How many of them have laws, in place to be able to deal with movement of either personal data or corporate? Now, when you were doing the introduction, you made mention of a white paper that Nigeria has, NICDA specifically, on collaboration with African countries. And unfortunately, you have just 3 African countries on that list. So what does that tell you? There's a lot of work to be done, even at the judicial level. So each of these countries, each of the African countries need to sit down and come up with laws or regulations that should be able to guide this. Now, some of the panelists spoke about breaches, and this is one of the things that is at the center, at the heart of people who want to, transact business digitally. I would probably not, sitting here in Nigeria, want to transact business with somebody perhaps in Cameroon or say in Ghana that I'm not sure of how my data will be protected. Now, most times you go to website of some of these companies or some of these entities you want to transact with, and you, lo and behold, you'll be so surprised that there's nothing about, that data privacy policy and all of that. So what that basically means is that, it's just me, being thrown out there in the open. So there's a lot of security issue, or rather security issues around movement of data, which I think the starting point will be for these jurisdictions to be able to come up with laws or regulations to guarantee, the safety of data movement from one jurisdiction to the other. Now, one of the things that I identify as the impact of the regulation that we currently have is that, if properly done, it's going to create a lot of confidence. It's going to create a lot of confidence within the system. But again, how do you create that confidence if the individual jurisdictions do not even have regulations or laws, to deal with all of these issues? And that point I probably want to speak to has to do with looking at it from the regional perspective. So as a region, aside the jurisdictions, so we have this free trade agreement that we're all working towards to ensure that we harness the opportunities presented by it. But as a region, can we say at the moment that we'll have a harmonized law or regulation, or rather that took into consideration the individual jurisdictional differences to be able to create what I may call a harmonized law or regulation that probably will be attached or made reference to in the implementation of the free trade agreement? Currently, there's nothing like that. So there's a whole lot of work to be done. Yeah, there are activities on the background, but we need to do more to be able to harness, the opportunities that we have in our minds, stuff that, this agreement will present to us. And more importantly, let's also not forget that as, this agreement provides opportunity for Africa as a continent. I think for me, the major advantage that will come from it will be the what I may refer to as inter-trade collaborations between Africa as a continent and the other regions. And the truth of the matter is that with what you have, for instance, under the EU GDPR, right? Most countries that subscribe to that will not want to do business with the African continent in this present condition, because there's a lot of insecurity with respect to personal data or even corporate data. So it's important that, yeah, there are activities on the background, but we'll continue to make effort. And those efforts must be, just like some of us spoke about, the approach moving from bottom to the top, which I agree completely. And also the issue of, that clear collaboration between the private and the public sector. Because the truth of the matter is that both are actually drivers of this scheme. So we need to, as a continent, look at it from that regional view, aside the jurisdictional efforts that will be made. So that would be my take on that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Naje. Chima, do you have anything to chip in?
Not much. I think the other panelists have done justice to this particular question. I think I'm particularly more interested on what Mr. Bidemi said, where he said, the introduction of the DPCOs here in Nigeria was I think it's an implementation strategy that seems to, at least for what we see it to be, it is an implementation strategy that seems to be working, because if you leave the compliance to data privacy alone to the hands of the countries or the participants in the AfCFTA, there's a likelihood, and I know a lot of people will agree, that they would like to make themselves look good, say that they have all these policies in place, they have all these practices in place that makes it safer for you to transact with them. But if you have a third party who comes in every now and then to assess exactly against whatever regulations you have, how much you are putting in the measures to comply, it keeps these people on their feet. I think it's something that needs to be translated, not just from the organizational level, but it needs to transcend to a country level and even statewide. Have people who are given the power to go in to assess how these people are complying. What exactly needs to be done for them to ensure that they are trading or they are protecting the rights of their data subjects that they're dealing with, both from the individual angle and also from the corporate angle, and then have this data, this communication done more frequently and even escalated to the AU level or the AfCFTA secretariat level, so that people and countries know that, okay, if we're going to involve you in digital trading, we need to be sure that the participants in this trade agreement or in this trade action are not being exposed to unnecessary vulnerabilities. And it's something that I feel that we can move forward. And then also, like Mr. Chin had mentioned, that harmonization of the data laws, because where you have the different laws existing in their jurisdiction, by no fault of theirs, I was mentioned, because every jurisdiction have their peculiarities. But we, like I mentioned earlier, the first time I was speaking, like we have in the EU, where you have all 27 member states aligning with the GDPR, but enforcement is done on a state level. We should be able as a country or as a continent to come together and have something like that, consider the peculiarities of trading in the various member states, come up with a document, create some harmonization and standardize it across all the member states, and then enforce, take it from the bottom up, and let's have it, harmonized that way. I think looking at where the AfCFTA is trying to take the continent to in terms of trade, it's not something we can put in the background anymore. That conversation needs to start, and it needs to be taken seriously. And I think I'm happy that we have some representation across the continent listening in, and some people who actually have some pull, who can pull from the policy level and even from the operational level of things across this jurisdiction. This is something that I feel we should take away from this conversation and start talking about how we would ensure that we are making ourselves attractive in the trade markets, especially for the big traders in the AfCFTA. Make yourself more susceptible for people to want to trade with you, because I am confident that if I'm giving you my data, I wouldn't wake up one morning and see my data being sold on the dark web, or somebody using my data to do something that they shouldn't be doing. I think that's going to be it for me. Owen, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Chima. I have one more question that
Hi, your internet is speaking of infrastructural issues, right?
Okay, my apologies. I think I dropped off a bit. Apologies. Hi, Ridwan, are you there?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, so just one last question. What are your thoughts? Do you think Africa as a continent can achieve the level of implementation of data security that has been achieved by the European Union?
All right. Is it possible to achieve? Yes, it's very possible. I think it's important to clarify one thing. When you say data security, and when we say data protection, one bit, they're like completely distinct concepts. And security itself, which is the principle of integrity and confidentiality, is actually a principle under data protection. Security could extend to both data that is personal and non-personal. So I think it's very important to clarify that. And knowing fully well that data protection laws only applies to personal information or personal data, so to speak. It has nothing to do with corporate data, like that says. If you're looking to protect corporate data, you look at some of that framework. So I think it's very important to guide the conversation. So if we're looking at security in the sense that what EU is doing with a body like ENISA, quite a number of African countries have also established their own computer emergency response team. Quite a number of countries already have a national cybersecurity strategy, also guiding their security framework. But I guess as it relates to data flow, we're specifically addressing protection of personal data that forms a key component of the trade itself. And to that extent, is it possible to have what the 27 EU member states have? Yeah, it's very possible if we're very deliberate about how to go about it. First is making sure that every single African country first adopt a comprehensive data protection framework. They make their data protection authorities independent, well-funded, and also well-staffed. Outside of that too, in terms of harmonization, it's also very important that the strength of these laws are also very decent. It's not a case where, the laws are it's very easy for people to draw parallels between what you have in some African countries and what maybe the GDPR, for example. But often than not, it's not always that reflective of what it is. So it's about designing something that is very relative to us. And I think it's completely unfair to also compare ourselves to maybe a more advanced space like the EU, for example, for many reasons, not just because we've had a framework years ahead of Africa, but more importantly, because I think it's really unfair to make that comparisons. There are about 50-something countries in Europe. It's just 27 out of them that actually come together to say we have a strong data protection within the Union. Other countries outside of the EU itself have a data protection framework. And it's also very important to always make that part of the conversation. So outside of that, to conclude my hood, a lot of reference has been made to the Malabo Convention. It's cool, it's good for cooperation, to explore international cooperation mechanism, which are also, you find them under all the data protection laws you have on the continent. But also, it's also important to know that the convention itself is just a convention, like every other convention. It's not like, it's just suggesting the barest minimum of what should be contained in the national data protection law. So it's not like, it's different from the Human Rights Charter, for example, that you can probably even sue on. So it's just suggestive of what the barest minimum in national law should look like. And also, it's important to also note that being a convention also, that was started in 2014, there are like new concepts now, which I feel that document itself might probably be outdated in addressing some sort of modern risk. So it's important to sit down, continue to have this conversation, continue to work with stakeholders, the African Union Commission, different African countries, to let them see why it's important. And interestingly, we saw what happened in Kenya yesterday, where an High Court ruled the digital identity program. A very sizable part of African countries are also adopting national identity program, also trying to digitalize, of course, with the support of the World Bank. And in many of these countries, it's either there is a data protection law or none exists, or there's a data protection authority, or maybe it's not independent, or maybe it doesn't even exist at all. So if you, the conversation applies across board. If you're deploying a digital identity program and you're not doing something like a data protection impact assessment, a human rights impact assessment, you're rolling out new technologies, facial recognition technologies, you're rolling out surveillance tools without conducting things like human rights impact assessments. It's not just a big problem, but like I said again, it's very important to continue to have this conversation, continue to engage stakeholders, continue to hold government accountable, and continue to use strategic litigation to drive the need to do what is right. But more importantly, for every country to also adopt strong laws or stronger laws, recognize how we can work together. It's not sufficient that you have just few African countries recognizing each other to be a sufficient territory. But also, you've also found out that, I mean, which is something that maybe a lot of people don't know, but a country like Bosnia and Russia has actually recognized a couple of African countries to have an adequate data protection law. So we need to have that conversation to see how we can also start recognizing ourselves, recognizing the strength of our laws, and also the administration of this key concept. But outside of that, I think a lot has been said about using adequacy as a transfer mechanism, but the truth is there are also other transfer mechanisms available under different laws. Even if you want to move data outside the EU, the key concept is making sure that there's some sort of an adequate safeguards that follows this data as they move across different territories. Of course, at some point, data will always move to territories that maybe either unfriendly or maybe they have an insufficient framework. But the key consideration is, as an entity, whether e-commerce company or organization who is trying to move across different African countries, what safeguards are you putting in place when this data move across board? Funnily, not even every African country has adequacy as a basis for transfer. So it's very important that we shouldn't be obsessed about adequacy as a transfer mechanism itself. There are a couple of other transfer mechanisms that are out there. And like I said, African data protection laws are different. So it's important to recognize the uniqueness of different country context specific, to recognize the different countries, their context specific issues, while also developing and also implementing this policy. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ridwan, for the very elaborate explanation. So at this point, we are running short of time. I will just ask the panelists to give recommendations on how best the data security considerations, as well as personal data transfer can be protected, as well as, their general recommendations on the topic. So I would first be calling on Louis for his recommendations. Please, we have a minute.
Yeah, I think that we all as stakeholders must be interested in all the advocacy and sensitization of the African continental free trade. More will be rolled out for us to, and then we will, as we understand, we can position our businesses to take advantage of the continental free trade. It has just taken off just a year, and we need to give it more time. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Louis. I'll call on Bidemi next to give his recommendations.
Yeah, thanks, Uwem. I think Long said, I would, if I'm to pick one amongst all the many things that have been said, would be for the private sector to actually lead the conversation more. If we look at it more from a data protection point of view, and that's the protection of personal information, identifiable personal information, yes, we might say, oh, possibly it's within the realms of privacy laws or privacy rights law, it's within the realms of what governments should look at and all of that. But if we look at it within a broader context of data security, as it were, and that's the security of information, the security of infrastructure, data transmission infrastructure and all of that, then we then understand that businesses should actually take this thing even more seriously. I mean, with the great increase in cyber crimes and things of such, right? We then know that businesses that take the conversations around data security to the back burner are practically not ready for business. So in summary, I think businesses should take these conversations a little bit more seriously. Let them not be shy of the data protection aspect of this conversation, which is a fundamental aspect of the conversation anyway, and look at it more broadly, that as personal information is being protected, as principles and policies and the laws are being put in place to ensure the protection of personal information, so also are those principles, policies, and laws also cascaded into the bigger conversations around the confidentiality, integrity, and the accessibility to that information, all of which is subsumed in the data security conversation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Thank you, Bidemi. I'll give Mr. Najet the floor at this point.
Thank you so much, Uwem. For me, it has to do with let's have the laws, let's ensure the regulations are there, and as stakeholders, let's all jointly drive those laws, let's jointly drive those regulations and continue to drive them. Because if we, like I said, if we need to harness the enormous opportunities that I see in the free trade agreement, we can't do that without all of these being in place. And also as stakeholders, whether from the private sector or from the public sector, we all need to put our hands on the deck and get to the tax. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Najee. I would give Ridwan the floor at this point. Okay, my apologies. Lewis will be dropping off. I think he has to drop off. He has some other engagements. Thank you very much, Lewis, for taking time out to attend this session.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you to all our co-panelists. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lewis.
All right, yeah, thanks. So for me, I mean, my final thoughts will be, it's important for us to continue to drive this conversation like it's been emphasized a lot on this panel, but also to look at other components of digital trade, which is digital identity, interoperability, the role that encryption plays, consumer protection, and all of these issues that also sort of encompass as we continue to trade. So it's not just looking at the conversation from a single prism of whether there's a data protection law, whether there's a cybersecurity framework. We should look at it from all of these other components that sort of also helps and also sort of shape how trade would be, the digital trade landscape would be. But finally, my thoughts would be first for African countries to recognize the role of protection of personal information as also an extension of constitutionally guaranteed rights, and for them to start being able to make a business case tied to actually their own economic prosperity too. And it's not just about trying to make laws that stifles or that sort of restricts rights, that limits the ability to do research, limit the abilities of journalists to actually report fairly on things that have public interest. It's important for us to have rights respecting data protection laws that not only endears business to do business very correctly and with respect to human rights of people, but also that also commits governments to itself to respecting those rights, not data protection laws that exempts government or what has a wide exceptions. Thank you very much for putting together this session.
All right, thank you very much, Ridwan. Chima, you have the floor.
All right, thank you. I think for me, my final thought would be I think the panelists have spoken a lot about the various concerns around this trans-border trade and how data protection laws would influence it. I think in the conversations that need to happen following this discussion, there needs to be some consideration of how privacy by design is considered. So develop policies that take into consideration the various angles of the data subject, because primarily they are the ones who will be at the receiving end of whatever policies or negotiations that would happen. And if you're doing any conversations or you're having any negotiations and you're not considering how the end user is going to be affected by them, it's dead on arrival, it's futility as far as I'm concerned. So that conversation across the member states, across the participants, the stakeholders of the AfCFTA needs to consider privacy by design. How exactly are we going to monitor, how are we going to protect the rights of the data subjects, and then move forward to implement the various recommendations that have been said here in this panel. And that's about it for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chima. And thank you to all the panelists for their great contributions in the course of this session. We've had very wonderful insights from the panelists, and we say thank you. Thank you to the audience that took our time to attend this session. Very much appreciated. Please stay tuned because we have another session coming up shortly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Owen. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, everyone.
Participants has left a thing or two. Right about now, before we go into the next session, if you have any questions, please endeavor to send your questions to the mail in the chat box. And this is also to remind our participants that if you need to know more or to be informed and be updated on the current happenings in the data protection space, we have a quarterly report that is always released. So you can check the quarterly report in the link that will also be dropped in the chat session. We also want to thank our sponsors and supporters, 21 Search, Tax Tech, NDP Academy, AO2 Law, Tax Aid, TGL, First Fiduciary, ABR, Africa Business Radio. We also want to thank our supporters, NIFTA, Promacida, Crowdivest, Layer 3, MultiChoice, Banwa and Igodalo, iCentra, Washen, CARTS, and Leadway Pension. I want to thank you for the support during the preparation and the execution of this program. This is also to remind our participants available on social media. You can follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook with the name Africa DP Conclave. Thank you for staying with us at the first session. We will go on a 15-minute break and be back for the fourth panel session. Thank you very much and have a wonderful break time. perspective. Amazing conversations from the first panel session to the second, the third, and now we're going into the final session. Now, this session's topic is data protection and cybersecurity in the growing digital economy across Africa. And our speakers are Aisatu Sila, Rob Adote, Dr. Kemi Omotubora, Alice Namuli Blasvik, Salim Salam, Confidence Staffley, and this session will be moderated by Victoria Olani. Victoria Olani is an innovative lawyer with significant interest in digital economy, data protection, cybersecurity, and general intersection of technology and law. She aspires to be a thought leader in data protection and information security. And this has driven her towards making several publications on topical issues in this field. Victoria Lonnie is a trainee solicitor at Detail Commercial Solicitors, a top commercial law firm in Lagos, Nigeria. She is actively involved in providing startup advisory services as part of her firm's corporate and commercial practice area, as well as creating client-centric commercial solutions tailored to meet the client's needs. She also does some social impact services in her capacity as a volunteer for the No Go Fall MAGA cybersecurity initiative and as the host of the Data Protection 101 podcast. Over to you, Victoria Olami. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Victoria Olani, and it's such a pleasure to be moderating this session. I'm so excited to have a discussion on the topic. As was mentioned earlier, the topic for this panel session is data protection and cybersecurity in the growing digital economy across Africa. And I have a distinguished panel of people with years and years, even decades of experience on data protection and cybersecurity in Africa and even outside of Africa. I have on the panel Aisha too. I can see you are here already. I have Salim, I have Confidence. I have Alice also on the panel session with me here. I have Rock, and I'll be giving a brief profile of each of my speakers shortly. Aisha too has a wealth of experience in technology-related law, including consumer digital services, software license, posted service, data protection, compliance, privacy and design, telecommunication, information security, and the full arsenal that governs data protection in Africa and even outside of Africa. She practices in Paris at the moment, and she has practiced in the UK, so she has cross-border experience on data protection and privacy-related matters. Salim has over a decade experience in information technology strategy and business analysis. He is highly skilled in design and delivery of high performance information communication technology. I also have Alice here with me. She's a partner and the head of tech and innovation in our firm, Katende Sasempwa and Cookate. I'm not sure I got the name right, but you can correct me subsequently. Thank you. She specializes in tech and law and with a keen interest in artificial intelligence, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, fintech, cyber law, and data protection. I also have Confidence here. Confidence is a cybersecurity and cyber awareness evangelist. She's a cybersecurity professional. She's an author. She's an entrepreneur with over a decade wealth of experience in tech. She is the founder and executive director of the Cyber Safe Foundation, and it's such an honor to have you here with us, Confidence. I have Adekemi here. Adekemi is a lecturer at the Department of Commercial and Industrial Law in the University of Lagos. She holds a PhD in cybersecurity law from the University of Leeds, UK, and a master's in cyber law from the same university. Our core research and writing focus is on the intersection of law and tech, particularly privacy, data protection, and identity management. I also have Rock here. Rock is a well-grounded cybersecurity professional and a process automation resource officer with over a decade experience in secure software development. So this is my esteemed and distinguished panel who will be discussing with us today on data protection and cybersecurity in the global digital economy across Africa. As I said earlier, I'm Victoria Lonnie, and I'll be moderating this panel session. Now we have about 1 hour, 30 minutes for this panel session. So we have to do a lot on the time management part, because this is a topic we can talk about for over 24 hours and not exhaust. And we will all agree with me that we can go on and on. So we have about 4 major questions, and each speaker will have about 5 minutes to discuss their questions and their sections. Then also the audience will be allowed to send in their questions in the chat box or to the email that was attached to your joining link. So before we go into the questions, I'd like to give a background. Over the past few sessions, the past panel sessions, there have been discussions about digital economy, about the African Free Trade Area agreement. We also have various sessions, how data security, how data protection is important to the digital economy. And to give a little context to this, we cannot discuss digital economy without discussing data and cross-border transfer of data. And we cannot discuss data, cross-border transfer of data, without discussing cybersecurity alongside. Just to give a context to it, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development released the Digital Economy Report for 2021. And the larger part of the report was talking about data and transfer of data. In fact, data has been described as the currency of the digital economy. Some people describe it as the new oil. I have my reservations about that, but that's not the discussion for today. So when we talk about digital economy, cross-border transfer of data is very important. That's why even in the decision of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that we've been looking at, there is one of the decisions is for the third phase of implementation to cover e-commerce. And one of the things involved in e-commerce part is data protection and privacy, because you cannot do e-commerce without transferring data from device to device or from country to country. That's why also in the digital transformation strategy in Africa for 2020 to 2030, 3 of the objectives touch on data protection and cybersecurity. One is to get the cybersecurity, the Malabo Convention to come into force, starts to get the required number of countries, about 15, to ratify the convention. Another one is to encourage discussions about data protection and cybersecurity. Another one is to create awareness on balancing cybersecurity and data protection. Another one is to promote open standards and interoperability for cross-border transfer. So it is recognized all over the world that data is important in the digital economy. When we now bring it down to Africa, if data is important for digital economy, then some kind of regulation or legislation is important when it comes to data. Then we will look at Africa by the report, the latest report from July, or that was September, from the Paradigm Shift Initiative, says about 32 African countries have data protection laws. Then when it comes to the regional level, we're in West Africa, we have the ECOWAS Supplementary Act. In Southern Africa, we have a model law. In East Africa, there is no regional law on data protection in that instance, but there's a draft framework for cybersecurity. Alice, you correct me on that if I'm wrong. There's a draft framework for cyber laws by the Eastern African Community. Yes, there's a draft framework for that, but there is no data protection regional framework like that in East Africa. Then the Malabo Convention itself, of the 55 African countries, only 8 have ratified it. And since 2014, it has not come into force. Now, from everything I've said, we can see why it's important to have a conversation on data protection and cybersecurity, because digital economy has come to stay. Let's say pre-COVID, people couldn't relate, but after COVID, we had to take our lives to the internet. We have to take our lives online. We have to take our businesses had to start having online stores, Facebook, Instagram. So it became a part of our everyday lives. The digital economy has come to stay. There's a projection that it will constitute over 24% of the world GDP by 2025. 2025 is just around the corner. So we'll be having this conversation today, and my panelists will be contributing both from the Nigerian perspective, the African perspective, and also foreign perspective. That's why we have Ashatu here. She will be telling us about non-African perspective and how we can improve our laws to even meet up with global standards. We'll also be looking at it from cybersecurity angle and from data protection angle. I've spoken for too long already, so let's get into the discussion. So my first question is, how sufficient are data protection laws in the competing digital? So both from the Nigerian perspective, the African perspective, and then from someone looking in from the outside. Does the outside world think African countries have current sufficient data protection laws in the competing digital economy? And my first speaker on this will be Adekemi. Adekemi, what do you have to say about this question? How sufficient are current data protection laws in the competing digital economy? Before we proceed, I would like to remind us that we have about 5 minutes per speaker, just for the sake of managing time and so that the conversation can go around and everybody can give opinions on each question. Thank you very much. Over to you, Adekemi.
Oh, okay, thanks, Victoria. Where shall I start? Your question is whether the African, we have sufficient laws or adequate laws for the digital economy. So let me just cite the example of the AU, the Malabo Convention. Let me use that as my example, because otherwise I'll come down to Nigeria. I've not studied all the laws in different African countries. So if we take the Malabo Convention as an example, I see the answer as a bit of yes and a lot of no, right? So it's a bit of yes because the Malabo Convention contains at least some of the provisions we would expect to see in a data protection law, right? It attempts to merge all these different areas that are actually interrelated. We can see how e-commerce is integrated with cybersecurity and is integrated with data protection. So we see all this in one single document. We see the rights of the data subject, we see the principles, regulating or governing data processing. We see all of that. So to that extent, you say, this is a good attempt, but like you mentioned, that has not even, it hasn't had the desired effect in terms of whether African countries actually, ratify this convention. It has not come into force, right? So even if the provisions are good, well, no, it hasn't come into effect. So there's a problem in that regard. So yes, that you see all the regular noises, all the regular provisions, they're all there. No, because I think, just maybe to repeat that point, it's not been ratified, right? But we have to ask why was it not ratified? Why are the countries dragging their foot, ratifying this convention? And one thing that, I've seen recurring in the narrative, in the literature, in the argument is, look, these Africans don't really understand what is at stake, right? But we can knock out that argument again now because 30 plus African countries now have data protection laws. So it's not really that Africans or the governments don't understand what a data protection law is or what it does or how useful it can be or whatever. But one thing that I see, because we are discussing the digital economy, and I think that's not emphasized enough, is that we need to ask whether this convention is actually fit for purpose, right? So the convention was adopted in 2014. 2 years later, the GDPR was passed, right? So we all like to say the GDPR is the, how they call it, the gold standard for data protection. That's an argument for another day, but that's, the narrative that is going around. This is a good standard that every country aspires to, most regions aspire to, most countries have adopted GDPR-like laws. So to that extent, I mean, I don't know if you are following my, seems like quite a story, but it was 2014 that the convention was adopted. GDPR was passed 2 years later. So it's beginning to look slightly like it's outdated. If it was going to use the GDPR gold standard, then there would be some things that would be missing, of course, in the AU convention. So what I see actually, and what we have neglected, I think, is the fact that this is a slightly dated convention, and is dated even in the context of the digital economy. Why do I say that? I think we've been sold this narrative, and we keep repeating it, that all that data protection serves is the protection of privacy, and that's not correct. Data protection has, wider functions beyond protecting individual privacy. It's also meant to promote social, economic progress, right? So it's supposed to be pro-right and pro-innovation. And the laws that we pass must be able to balance these two aspects. They must protect the rights of the individuals, and they must ensure that we also promote innovation, that small businesses that African countries tend to rely on so heavily, they are able to thrive under this regime. And you see that one of the criticisms of the GDPR, for example, presently, is that it's very hard for small businesses to comply. There are difficult compliance requirements, right? And recently, the UK that just left the EU has now said is going in a different direction, right? It has a national, what it calls a national data strategy, right? It has what it has now rolled out as a new direction for data, saying that actually there are over-prescriptive provisions in the GDPR that hinder innovation, make it hard for businesses to comply, make it hard for them, to innovate. So it's saying, we have to be pro-innovation and we have to be pro-right. So we need to balance these two elements. I think especially when we're now discussing the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and not over-focus. Fundamental human rights are important, and data protection laws are centered on those protections, but they're also to ensure that businesses thrive, that we don't make rules that businesses can't comply with. Okay, so we have something like consent, which needs to be granular, and then we have new innovations in technology like artificial intelligence that make it very difficult actually for all these principles to work the way they are supposed to work. So what the UK is doing, for example, is looking at all these provisions all over again and saying which ones are really difficult, or if you like, impossible actually to implement, and what can be done, to change the narrative. So what I see again is Africa being left behind because we are stuck in one bubble of narrative that we are supposed to protect privacy, with data protection rights, and we will be stuck in that narrative while other countries are moving ahead to ensure that they strike the right balance between the rights of individuals and between the rights of individuals and how companies comply and do business. So they have rules that companies can actually implement, and the rights of people can be guaranteed. It's not just in the books. It's not some idealistic provisions saying you have X, Y, Z right, which you can't actually implement, or which are virtually useless. So I see that all these, all these developments are things that we need to reevaluate in the light of, for example, the Malabo Convention. Have I spent my time overshot?
Yes, you have. Please, you have to round up now.
Yes?
You have to round up now. That's all right.
All right.
So I can see one of the important points you made is that data protection should not only be looked at from the human rights perspective, but we should also look at it from an economic and development perspective. Then you spoke about how Africa is being left behind. So this is going to take me to you, Aisha. Based on, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing your name right, so you can correct me when you turn on your mic to speak.
No, it's okay.
Okay, so based on what Dr. Kemi has said, do you think African data protection laws are sufficient? Like, if we are going to do a sort of comparison, although I understand that every country is unique and should make laws that fit the narrative for their different countries. But if we're going to do a comparison, because the digital economy is like worldwide and global, do you think our laws are sufficient enough to compete in the digital economy?
So if the aim is to compete in the digital economy, the question would be, is having a law sufficient to guarantee that? And my answer would be no. Just having a law is not going to open all the doors. The law has to be implemented. It has to be complied with. It has to be practical. And if there are laws that are not enforced, then it doesn't really make a difference. If we look at Africa, we have 31 countries with data protection laws today. Out of them, 18 countries have a DPA. The others don't have a DPA. They don't have a data protection authority. Lesotho, that's had a data protection act for many years, still doesn't have a data protection authority. So having the laws, no matter how beautiful they're written, they will not open all the doors to the digital competition. Then once you have the authority would need to also enforce the law. So the law itself, again, to me, is not sufficient. And there's some countries are waiting actually to have the means to be able to have the authorities in place, and they're not rushing to pass laws because they know that if they rush, first the world will change. By the time they have the money or they have the possibility to set up the proper regulators, the things will have changed. So I think some countries have decided to have a pragmatic approach and decided not to invest in laws and new structures if they actually can't sustain them. But then with regard with the law, so this was my first comment. Now with regard to the laws themselves in Africa, obviously they vary, but I don't believe that most of them are easier to comply with than GDPR. Under GDPR, you have the notion of a legitimate interest as a legal basis for processing. In the majority of African countries, you don't have that basis, which means that you need to get consent of the data subject all the time without sufficient exceptions for the laws to actually be complied with by whoever really wants to comply with the laws. And the second thing with GDPR is that you do not need to go to seek the consent or the authorization of the Data Protection Authority each time you're going to process data, whereas in most African countries, this is a requirement. You need to get you need to get an authorization from the Data Protection Authority to transfer data internationally, or sometimes to just process the data. You need to get you need to register with the Data Protection Authority. This, for an organization that is limited in resources, would not help comply with data protection laws. And this is a requirement. This requirement of seeking seeking authorization from the data protection authorities was a requirement that we had in some European countries before GDPR. We had that in France, we had that in Spain, and most companies decided not to comply with that because just sending data to the cloud would mean that you need to apply to the Data Protection Authority and wait for 2 months to get a go-ahead. A company that wants to be competitive would just say, I'm happy to pay a fine, but I'm not going to lose millions just because I need to get the French DPA to transfer my data to Morocco or to transfer my data to the United States. So, so I think there's a practicality element that needs to be looked at as well. Again, there are two trends in Africa. You have some countries that would recognize legitimate interest, some countries that would not recognize legitimate interest. Then you have, my notes have 17 countries out of 31 in Africa that recognize legitimate interests. So it's a bit more than half. Then regarding seeking the data protections authorization prior to processing the data, which in reality is highly impracticable, then the vast majority of African countries require that, which means that most companies to be competitive will be in breach. And this is my answer at the moment.
All right, thank you very much for your contribution. Sorry, I'm having internet issues at the moment. I think that's the general reality in this part of the world. Thank you very much for your contribution. So I'm going to Alice to hear what you have to say concerning what Estatu has said, what Kemi has said, and particularly you practice in East Africa. And it appears, you can correct me on that, that there is a certain hesitance in East Africa when it comes to like data protection laws. The East African community does not particularly have a model law or a regional law on data protection, and very few Eastern African countries actually have data protection laws. So while you are giving your explanation, can you touch on this subject also?
Yeah, thank you. To go back to that, if I was to give you one answer, one response to your question, whether the data protection laws are sufficient, I would say yes. Okay, the greatest majority, yes. And the reason is that I think we have this narrative on the continent that is going around and has made us believe that we actually don't have sufficient laws. So meaning we need to ask for more and more and more. But when you look on the continent, most of the countries that have enacted data protection laws or which have enforced or implemented the African Union Cybersecurity Regulatory Framework, you'll find that majority of those countries, I would say, I think 0.1% have implemented or enforced the regulations they have or the laws. So what does that mean? Do we actually need more laws, or we need to actually focus on what we have already? In Uganda, because when someone talks about data protection, even before we had a Data Protection Act in Uganda, just same as Kenya or other East African countries. And other African countries, we had other regulations that were governing this environment or the industry. But then, so many people kept on pushing, we need a specific law, we need a specific law. Okay, fair enough. Now we've had it since 2019. And then what? We've only had a data protection authority, I think like a month ago or 2 months ago, since 2019. But still, like I think Isa Tizan who mentioned that how many data breaches have been reported? 0. So we need to analyze and say, with the few legislations we have, how can we make sure that actually they are implemented or enforced? I don't think we should get into a race of accumulating as many laws as we can. For my experience, I mean, I do a lot of work on the continent in this field. You find that actually most African countries suffer from the same thing, some similar thing. And it's not only in this field, especially now, like for specific, very many African countries have an attitude of what we call is like lack of compliance. And it doesn't have to, it does not only affect the data protection industry, it affects so many areas. So we have very beautiful, for me particularly in Uganda, I always tell people, and which is very true, we have some of the best laws in the world, but they are very good at also taking shelter on the shelves and never used, never implemented. So does that help us to lobby for more regulations when we've not even been able to implement what we have? There are some systematic problems we have culturally that we need to address actually before we go out and cry wolf how we don't have these regulations to regulate the industry. The question is, for those 31 countries or 20 countries, or let me say 5, which countries have been able to efficiently enforce or implement these laws? The ones that have. So it's also a very good example to all those other countries which have not yet enacted these laws. Like, what's the rush? Why go in when actually there's no, we don't have a specific example to say, oh, okay, in Africa, this particular country, this and this happened. I think most probably South Africa, but of course South Africa has its own unique, I guess, dynamics. But like majority of African countries, that's where we lie. We have a very, very, very poor culture of compliance. And until actually we address these kind of things, I don't think we'll go very far. If a big company in my country, in our East African region, or an individual was sued for, like, let me say, a data breach, most commonly would be these huge businesses. In most cases in African countries, these big, the big forces will always pay themselves out of this kind of situation. So, I mean, Africa is full of corruption. Our courts are full of infiltrated with a lot of corruption. So how would that help? Whether you have the best, even though you have the best laws, there are some other problems that are constantly affecting, the implementation. Another one is, I think, lack of awareness. We have a very small percentage of citizenry on the continent who appreciate what even data protection is, what privacy is. And also someone, I think, mentioned, the first speaker said, most people are benchmarking on the GDPR, but what's the definition of privacy to an African? It could be a completely different thing. I do remember at the height of COVID last year, we had there was a data protection activist or NGO, civil society organization that went around and trying to lobby government to try and ensure they don't infringe on people's privacy. But then the citizens themselves they were just not concerned. Why weren't they concerned? Because the definition of privacy to them could be a completely different thing. Like, what is wrong with Facebook, obtaining my data without consent. To some people, it could actually be a very big thing, but in Africa, is that a very big thing? Then two, our economic situations also has a very, very big impact on the way we actually respond to these regulations, because again, through that whole, at the height of COVID, when so many organizations like, oh my goodness, that governments are misusing people's data and all that, to an ordinary African citizen, their most concern is putting food on my table. Whether my rights are infringed, that is secondary. And then another thing is that why it's very, very difficult and a challenge for us to have like some kind of a similar regulation on the continent is that again, we are all experiencing different economic prosperity. If you're talking about Somalia, if you go to Somalia and you're talking about data privacy, they will look at you like, do you have, because they're dealing with so many other challenges, you understand? While South Africans, they've gotten to a point where it's like, you know what, oh yes, WhatsApp and all these things. In Somalia, they're like, take a hike. We have other issues here. We need democracy. We need this and this. And you're telling them data privacy, the GDPR. They'll be like, please, the door is there. And our poverty levels are, they're still not the same. We are still grappling with different things, which is completely different from the European Union. The European Union, you find most of the countries, most of at the same level, shared values. In Africa, it's different. Then lastly, about, you were talking about, Victoria, about why in East Africa we don't, there's not much talk, I guess, about cybersecurity regulations or data, regional data protection or cybersecurity regulation. I am not enthusiastic about it. The East African community has been around for a very long time. We have so many protocols signed. We have so many beautiful things, you understand, on the shelves. What is their percentage of implementation? Do you understand? So it's one thing for the East African community to come up and say, yes, we have this data protection to govern the region. Okay, Tanzania, can you try to implement and enforce this? Because the truth of the matter is that we need to collaborate as a continent. We're talking about regulating an industry which has no jurisdiction. You're talking about someone being able to access my data from Nigeria, from Ghana. So how do you follow up with such cases? You understand? Unless you actually work, different countries work together. Do you understand? So personally, I'm not enthusiastic because as the East African community, the African Union, how many success stories has it had to implement these protocols they signed somewhere in some fancy hotels? So in summary, I would say we definitely need to address the core issues that constantly affect so many of these protocols from being implemented. So if again, to go back to your question, do we have sufficient laws? I think we have sufficient laws. Let's work with what we have. Then we can ask for more. And I think what we have, we can still be able to regulate this industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very elaborate explanation. From what our panelists have said on this question, I was able to get a few things. One is data protection laws should not just be human rights or economic, but I think the most important point stressed by the last two speakers is that it's not enough to have laws. Yeah, laws are good, but it's not sufficient to have laws. What are we doing about implementation? We should not just jump on the bandwagon of laws and laws and laws and laws and zero implementation. And implementation of law is just as important as having the law itself. Now I'm going to move into the other side of the table where we have the cybersecurity professionals. And to give a brief background, it appears based on statistics that there's been an increase in cyber attacks. There was this Kaspersky report that did a comparison of the first quarter, the second quarter, and in South Africa, there was about 24% increase between the second quarter of 2021 and the first quarter, a full 24% increase in malware. And one of the biggest examples would be that the Information Regulators website for the South Africa Information Regulator had to be taken down. That was sometime last month because the Department of Justice system was attacked by ransomware, and the email, the website of the South Africa Information Regulator had to be taken down for about 3 days or more than 3 days. So there has been a rapid increase in cyber attacks and cyber security issues in Africa at the moment. So my question is, given the rapid growth in cyber attacks and digital crime vis-a-vis the current acceptance of digital trading, how effective are cyber security measures? How effective, we are coming from how sufficient are our laws. Now, how effective are cyber security measures in Africa, Nigeria? So I will be going first to confidence. Before you speak, I want to apologize to future speakers because we have spent a lot of our time, a large part of our time on the first questions. If we can please stick to like 5 minutes at most when sharing our opinions, it would be appreciated so we can manage the time for this session and move on to other things. So over to you, Confidence. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Victoria. So I really like your question, but I would like to rephrase it. Your question was around if we have sufficient, if with security measures in place, why there's an increase, right? Your question is around
security measures are sufficient.
If they are sufficient, and I want to rephrase it and ask if we actually have security measures in place. I think we've paid lip service to cybersecurity for the longest time in the real practical sense of it. And we've seen a hike, in cyber attacks. That's not really a hike. And this is why I'm going to be saying this. We are seeing it as a hike for 3 reasons. One, there's been an increased reliance on technology more than we've ever had it before. So there's an increased reliance on technology for everything. This event, for example, 2 years ago, maybe be assembling in a nice hotel, and then we'll be waiting for our lunch break, or at this time. But here we are. I barely have physical events, and the list goes on. So we've had an increased reliance on technology, and really cybersecurity issues fall out of the fact that there are risk tied to using technology. Like there is tied to using just about anything. So that increased reliance on technology is what is, without the attendant risk management, is what is causing these hikes. Another key thing is a poor awareness. So, I'll just give us an example. We ran a program last year into this year that we're upskilling 4,500 SMEs, so employees of 4,500 SMEs, both the technical people, that's the IT guys, and the non-IT people. So we're giving cyber awareness training on this side and the very technical trainings on this side. We did it in partnership with the UK government. And we had some really core findings that I want to share. For example, we found out that 57% of employees of these beneficiary SMEs had, they did very poorly at identifying phishing emails from legitimate ones. We also saw that 76% of beneficiaries do not have basic cybersecurity controls in place, and 83% were not aware or do not understand prevalent cyber attacks and how it attack and how it relates to their businesses. So this came from a baseline survey that we did across 4,500 SMEs in Nigeria. So you see that the poor awareness, people don't have the basic cybersecurity awareness. They don't understand that, just downloading any app from out of the official app store could be a risk factor. They don't know that, cracked antiviruses, free antiviruses don't actually protect them. They don't know that turning on 2-factor authentication could be the barrier between their email accounts being hacked and their email accounts not being hacked. They don't know that strong passwords are a core thing and how to manage them could actually protect them. So these very basics are not in place, but we are increasing the adoption of technology. The third key thing also is profitability. Cybercrime has become more profitable than peddling drugs. It's the truth. People are cashing out. You put in $500, buy a ransomware as a service, and then you can get $500,000 out of it. I mean, that's a great investment if I was in that side of the business, So, but those are the issues that are in place, and we need to ensure that we are upping all of these factors and more to ensure that our businesses are protected, and as individuals as well, we are actually protected from these attacks. And I would say that our cybersecurity measures should go back to the basics. What are the basics to have in place before we start building up? So I've mentioned a couple of them now. How many organizations actually look at these things past compliance to ensure that they are able to meet up? How many organizations have gone back to the very basics to implement these things, both small, medium, and large organizations? So until we're able to not pay lip service to cyber awareness, and I'll go back again to cyber awareness, because you find that in many organizations, you're having a cyber awareness training, right? You have it once a year. There's no refresher. There's no daily reminder around the space. So it's that once a year, and that once a year is towards a PCI DSS compliance audit, or towards an ISO 27001. And then after that, we tick the box, okay, we've had compliance. And in that awareness training, the guy at the top is too busy with his work to be part of that training. It is the mid-weight level guys and the lower level guys that are in that training. So the key best practices that involve maybe the top management championing cyber awareness is lacking, and so people don't take it seriously. You have it once a year. Meanwhile, the threats are evolving. Now, ransomware and how it's delivered has evolved. You understand? How is that being captured in your cyber awareness plan? So those areas where they are very basic, we need to get better at getting them to be done well, so we can actually increase effectiveness of our cyber security measures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Confidence. Thank you. Over to you, Salim.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I really like your passion, confidence, actually. Lack of awareness is one of the major issues we have. And I can tell you with COVID-19, a lot of things have changed. COVID-19 came as a disease, right? Or a virus, but it turns out to be opportunity for others. It turns out to be new normal for others. So I'm just going to quote Alexandra Mayorkas, who was the US Home Secretary, Home Security Secretary. He once said that, let me be clear, ransomware now poses a national security threat. This is the US, and they've been attacked with ransomware a couple of times. Their gas network was attacked recently, and there were no fuel for the cars. Now, when you come, Alice Namuli said something. I'm hungry, and you're talking to me about data protection. I've not eaten. My major priority is food. But now you start talking to me about data protection or cyber security. That becomes a bit effective. Are the cyber security measures effective? It's definitely a no. Because if you can go to a report from EFCC and check in Nigeria here, check the number of cyber crimes, you'll be shocked, you'll be surprised. One of the major issues is lack of awareness. In addition to lack of awareness, we don't have the technical skills. We lack some technical skills in terms of security operation sensors, operational. A simple antivirus in an organization cannot be updated. You find some people using fake antivirus in organizations, a lot. How can they be protected? Now, in Nigeria, there was NSAS. A lot of organizations were attacked. A lot of institutions were attacked, and you now come back to poverty and all. Now, during the lockdown, young guys normally go out, buy, sell or buy cannot go out. So they have their computers at home and they just start trying new things. And before you know it, they've attacked here, they've shut down this website, they've shut down this website. So basically that is telling us that it is not existing. Because if during the lockdown, during the answers, people were able to attack some of the key organizations in Nigeria, then a big question needs to be answered. Now, when you talk about efficiency, I will say what I see happening is the imams, the pastors, during their sermons, they should remember to tell people that because everybody is digital now, everybody has a smartphone. You receive calls, you receive messages, immediately you click yes, you don't know what's happening, nobody understands. So people are not aware of the right thing that comes to their phones, or the right thing they should click, or the right message they should respond to, because you can receive a text message by responding or by clicking a button. Before you know it, you've been attacked, you've been hacked. A lot of cyber attacks are currently happening in the increase, and this down to digitalization. And digitalization is a digital economy is now the technology and everything is now converting to money. If you go to Bureau of Statistics in Nigeria, they will tell you that the technology sector has contributed huge amount within the certain period. So there's a lot of financial transactions, there is a lot of money going here and there. Then now you come back internally within banks, let's say, how sure are you that people are aware of, if you're leaving your desk, just probably ensure that your system is locked?
Sorry, Salim, I will need to cut you short here.
All right, that's
I need to round up or
okay.
Cut you short completely.
Well,
so we can...
I will just round up with just one message, and I've said it earlier. I think awareness is low, the technical know-how is low, and we also need to collaborate. We need to engage people that are experts in all these cybersecurity policies, installations, as well as there's a threat, there's an opportunity here. The better opportunity.
Thank you very much, Salim. Mark, do you have anything to add to what has been said by Confidence and Salim?
Okay. To contribute to what has been said already, I would just like to mention that cybersecurity is, if the measures we have are robust enough, I would like to mention one thing that is clear, is that cybersecurity is asymmetrical by nature. And what does that mean? It means you cannot just ascertain that cybersecurity posture, your cybersecurity posture is strong enough to protect you from modern emerging fraud threats or attacks. And why do I say so? You look at the industries, you need to isolate it by industries. In the financial sector, a lot is going on in cybersecurity when it comes to Nigeria. You understand? You might be having a lot of cyber crimes, but if you look at the data, practically, even there's no country that is free from cyber attacks. In Nigeria specifically, our banks are upscaling and doing enough to protect our system from daily attacks. But if you look at the government and the consumer industries, you see poor compliance. Now, that's one. On the government side, you also see that a lot of MDAs are scaling up with standardization of their processes, you understand? And this all leads to the evolution in technology. And what do I mean by the evolution in technology? We have seen lately between 2020 and 2021, emerging fraud trends. What are these emerging fraud trends? For instance, ransomware. the vectors through which cyber criminals perpetrate crime through ransom attacks has changed. And I'll give you instances. Secondly, COVID-19 has brought in some unique fraud tactics in Nigeria, and not just in Nigeria, in Africa. And I'll give you practical use case. For instance, you see the POS card data filtration attacks, where these days, because people don't want to come out from their homes as usual, they resort to POS to withdraw money, you understand, rather than going to the banks. And when you see that situation, do you know what cyber criminals are doing now? Cyber criminals are using Wi-Fi, shared Wi-Fi. You're putting your card in a POS machine, you want to collect money, and you don't know that that POS machine is actually collecting its, relying on the internet from a shared Wi-Fi from a cyber criminal. Sometimes even the POS operators are complicit in these attacks, you understand? And once you put in your card into that POS, all your data is passing through an unencrypted network. So many third-party tools exist there that enables this kind of attack. But now we are seeing this kind of fraud. This is something that we have proof of concept in. I've also been in labs where we've demonstrated this, and it's it's happening at an alarming rate. So you put your card, they give you your cash. Before you get home, you're seeing more debit alerts from your SMS, and you're wondering, how did they get my card data? Unknown to you that someone who is sharing the Wi-Fi with the POS operator is actually stealing your card information. Are you there? Can you hear me? Okay, so when you look at that situation, these are unique threats that were never in the scenario before now. These are unique threats that, for example, like I tell you, COVID-19 has brought in. So what does the government have to do in this slide? The government have to work with financial institutions to sensitize the masses on all this emerging fraud patterns. Now, let me go to ransomware. Ransomware, just like Confidence rightly mentioned and Salim rightly mentioned, is a huge problem. And why ransomware uniquely? We have different emerging fraud attacks. If you give me the opportunity to list them for you, they are very, very new, sophisticated attacks that we have been exposed to lately. But ransomware particularly is so painful because it actually affects the national supply chain, local supply chain, global supply chain. If you look at what happened with JBS meat supply in Australia, they took down all their systems. Before you know, people that were relying on Australia to produce pork and beef, they could not. So nobody could eat meat in Europe. All of a sudden, the prices of beef skyrocketed. If you look at the colonial pipeline attack in the United States, just because of that ransomware attack, nobody could, petrol prices were skyrocketed, you understand? So imagine when this thing happens in Nigeria, where we don't have robust institutions. So in the government, what I'm trying to say, why am I telling you all the stories is simple. In the government, when it comes to government information security compliance, we still have a lot of work to do. When it comes to financial institutions and banking compliance, yes, we are doing a lot. And why am I saying we are doing a lot? It's not as if we are there yet, but I know I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of financial institutions where even NITDA is also doing a lot. Let me just don't even say the banking institutions. Why am I saying NITDA is doing a lot? If you look at the SRAP project, that is the strategic roadmap and action plan for 2021 to 2024, you see among the 7 strategic pillars, cybersecurity is one of them. Yes, it would be a good thing for them to enforce the tenets of those documents, you understand, but it's good we're having it in the pipeline, but it's another thing for us to enforce it and make sure that it works for Nigeria. Now, back to ransomware. You can't, what I think the government needs to do is first is to make sure that legislation around cybersecurity is involving professionals, you understand, not just people not more lawyers in the table than technical people, not just government appointees that don't have sufficient knowledge on cybersecurity policies, but actual professionals. And why is that important? Because technology evolves by the day. And I give you a practical instance. I had the opportunity to download and had access to the Australian ransomware reporting plan, you understand, incident management plan.
Round up your contribution.
Okay. So let me just go straight to the resolution part and remediation part. Yes, we are not there yet when it comes to cybersecurity measures, but first we need to ensure security awareness, and security awareness is not just limited to training government appointees or companies is also consumer awareness is very, very important. And why is consumer awareness very important? You're having, for instance, most telecoms are resorting to social banking. If you look at homoglyph attacks and other novel attacks, these attacks have been unattended to when it comes to social banking. People can send you pseudo links with exact name of the business of MTN, and they will click on it and they could install malware on the phones, but nobody's talking about that till now. So consumer awareness is very important, not just enterprise IT awareness, you understand, and not just consumer awareness, localizing consumer awareness. Secondly, we need a legislation. We need to have more professionals involved in the legislation of cybersecurity policies in the country. Thirdly, we need to ensure that we arm people who are in the business of cybersecurity awareness, who are in the business of growing the capabilities, such as Confidence, as you see there, and other partners involved in this business. So far, with this in place, I'm sure we can do more in securing and ensuring that we have a robust cybersecurity response for Nigeria and Africa as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are quickly running out of time, so I'm going to move to the next talking point. Now, this goes across board for everyone: data protection, cybersecurity. There have been several statistics that show that there is a knowledge gap. There's a knowledge gap, and there is like a lack. There's a gap in skills required to actually do the work and the skills that the professionals have. Is this true? Is there really a knowledge gap or an academic gap or a technical gap, skill gap for DPOs and cybersecurity professionals as opposed to the people on the other end, the cyber attackers? Are they smarter? Are they better at using technology? Are they better at using the tools available to them than the people on the other end, than DPOs and cybersecurity professionals, CSOs? And if this is the case, what can be done? What's the best way to tackle this? So first, I'll be going to Aisatu. Then quickly, I think I'll take Alice next, and then Confidence.
So regarding the DPO's gap, I'm not of the view that all companies need to have a DPO. They need to find the knowledge somewhere, somehow. But if you have sorry, I'm from France, so I'm going to give you a French example. If you have a bakery somewhere in town, and I buy my bread by credit, and you have my details, I wouldn't impose on the baker to have a DPO if you're just working with his wife and child. So, but however, it'd be processing personal data. So again, there's an element of practicality and pragmatism that really needs to be looked at. So however, I do believe that the DPAs, the data protection authorities, should be the number one, and the ICT authorities as well. The IT security authorities should be working with the professionals on a regular basis. And as Rock Adote said, it's really important. Even I as a lawyer cannot work without the tech people with me. It's impossible. I need to have a technical person next to me if I want to practice IT law. And I need to learn all the time. I need to spend time, extra time, watching demonstrations, watching the latest technology that's been presented to me by the tech people. Otherwise, we're just working on different planets. So, I believe that that'd be a good practice to follow Rock's recommendation, i.e., make sure that the technical people work with the regulators, work with the lawyers, work with whoever needs to make sure that the recommendations are applied and complied with. So that's the first bit. The second bit is regarding the enforcement. We talked about the lack of enforcement. Alice talked about the absence of implementation. And also we talked about the African Union, Malabo Convention. What we have seen in Africa is that we tend to get the big picture as a template, but we don't get into the details. We don't have the toolbox that we could adapt. Everybody, if I'm a DPA in, for example, the Gambia, which is a country that's looking at passing data protection laws, if I'm a DPA in the Gambia, I wouldn't have a set of documents that I'd be able to use or adapt that reflect the African reality in order to have data protection implemented in a more granular way, some practical tools about how do you get consent if you're a small company, how do you deal with cookies, how do you deal with foreign organizations, because today the largest data processors and controllers are not in Africa, they're in America. And this is something that a lot of countries don't know how to deal with. But if there were a toolbox with different, very granular, practical guides, guidelines, guidance, templates, contracts with data processors, if we had that in Africa, if the African Union created that, for example, I suppose the Malabo Convention would be more easily embraced, because it's not just broad ideas, but it's also actually practical tools that the countries could use. And using that is part of training too, because you have this toolbox. You've been explained the use of it, and then you start using it and using it and using it, and you learn as well, because you don't only learn in school and in conferences, you learn by practice. So that could be very useful, and this is something that I've seen is missing in Africa. And unfortunately, what we see is that the French-speaking countries will go and take the toolbox from France that have little to do with the African reality, and in the English-speaking countries, then we go to the English ICO, and again, this is not the same world. So if there was on an African level a toolbox for cybersecurity and for data protection, I think that could cover a lot of the training gap.
So much. A toolbox idea. I think I'm hearing that for the first time. I think it's brilliant. Will you agree with me, Confidence? Over to you.
Yeah, I totally agree with her. We are currently actually working with one of the top fours around a toolkit of that nature. So yeah, I totally agree with her on the importance of having something like that, especially in developing countries, so people can sort of get something kickstarted in the environment towards ensuring that their cybersecurity posture is improved. However, going back to the question of skills gap, and thank you very much, Rock, for the shout out. I really appreciate that. So speaking about skills gap, I think I'm very I hold a different view about whether or not there's a skills gap. I think there's actually a demand problem. Like Rock said, the financial industry is maturity level is very high. So you find that most of the cybersecurity professionals at universities are graduating. They're going to the banks, but and people working in the fintech space. But outside of that, really, how many jobs do we actually now have openly available to cybersecurity professionals that pay a good enough amount to attract this talent? And do we also have retention strategies for our talent? So you find that we're having like the industry is bleeding talent right now. So everybody that has had some 4 or 5 years experience is doing the jackpot game. They're leaving for better for greener pastures, and that's the truth. So even the talent we have are leaving for better places because we don't have good retention strategies for our cyber talents. The ones that are coming in as freshers, may even struggle to get jobs in the reality of things, because outside of the fintech industry, who is hiring professionals as half as much as them? We can have that conversation. I'll definitely show with numbers that it's really the financial industry doing the best at absorbing this talent. So I think that there's a huge demand issue, and when the demand increases, the truth is that the industry becomes more attractive for people to actually build a career in and invest. So when I say becomes more attractive, how much is the average certification in cybersecurity? give or take $400, $500. How much is the average cybersecurity professional as an entry person earning? You know, so those are the issues there. So we need to really walk back, you know, around how do we build demand by growing supply and ensuring that we have this strategy, because the talents are in abundance, both trained and the ones that are randomly doing stuff, you know. I started off a program training girls in underserved communities, about 100 of them across 6 states in Nigeria. The girls that have been in that program for just 5 months understand cross-site scripting so well that they're able to demonstrate it, understand core concepts like, you know, monitoring traffic on the networks. These are very, very, very raw talents that are coming into an unstructured environment to learn. They're not going to a school, and they're actually being able to do these things so well, more than the way we are teaching them. So we need to realize that we need to be more intentional about growing the talent here, ensuring that they have places to actually do the work that they're paid for. The work that they're trained to do, and they find these openings. And the openings are not asking for 10 years of experience for an entry level, you know, so there are these little structures we need to put in place to ensure that the demand we have, we create a demand, and of course the supply will grow with it as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take a detour. Kemi, you are in the academic sector. So I want you to comment on the academic gap. Do you think there's an academic gap of any kind, and what are the ways to tackle it? You're on mute.
Okay, so fine, right. So I don't know whether to call it an academic gap in the sense that people have to come to the university to come and acquire, you know, knowledge of data protection and cybersecurity. We have a program, we've started an LLM in cyber law, but you know, there's a difference between what you know and what you practice. And I think I hope I said that right. Okay, so she gave an example of having people walk, you know, beside you, and you know, having the technical people around. And I always say that actually, that is important when you are framing any responses, the legislative, regulatory policies. You need to get all the stakeholders together, right? I have worked, my work has been interdisciplinary, right? I'm currently in Germany. I'm working in an interdisciplinary team, and we're looking at, you know, smart products, the legal and economic challenges of smart products. And these, you know, in the group, we have computational, how they call them, computational mathematicians, we have cybersecurity experts, we have economists, we have me as the lawyer. So it makes sense from that perspective, because I can't go back to school, please, and start studying cybersecurity. And you can't ask somebody who's already a computer scientist to come and understand what law and policy and so on is. So I think it's about actually practicalizing these things, and, you know, people would grow the skills. I mean, if you're a lawyer, you need to understand the basic things about law and how it works. But now translating that law into a technology context might be tricky if you don't understand how the technology works. So you are just going to say, oh, it's desirable that people have privacy, and here is how we are going to do it. But when people do technology come, they are going to say, hey, because this technology works this way, actually, we don't think that that is something that can be done or practicable. So I would say, you know, the gap which I see is actually with the understanding, both among the professionals and the, you know, regular people that we deal with, right, is how, and I think Alice touched on it, is people saying, what business do I have with the privacy when I'm hungry? So we need to be clear about actually what is being protected and how that helps them in their everyday life. right? If we are talking in the legal context, we need to ensure that lawyers understand what data protection is about, what it covers, what it should do, and the results that it should achieve. So there should be no idealistic, ideas and propaganda about what we need to frame an understanding that cuts across the professionals and everyday people. And we always need to have that working together so that we can solve the problems, that we are facing in this area. That will be my comment.
Thank you very much, Kemi. Alice, I can see you have your hands up. So a quick contribution. We're almost out of time.
Yes. Yeah, Dr. Kemi definitely what they call it, sparked something that definitely I wanted to share. And it was between a contradiction to what is it Constance? No, Confidence said. Yes, actually, if you're talking about a few people, the kind of percentage you're talking about who are skilled is very, very small. Confidence is very small, but also it doesn't help at all for us to have young people coming out, like let me say young graduates coming out and knowing these things, you understand, without what they call it, cutting across, like having professionals cutting across like all industries. We need people who understand cybersecurity in the academic sector. We need people who understand cybersecurity or data protection in the regulation, people who make laws. You understand? We need in the government, the prosecutors, we need judges, we need magistrates. You understand? You're not going to get someone who's just, had like that certification you've talked about and then, make them magistrates. Remember, the systems are already there. So if these systems are already there, how do you have an impact? Otherwise, you will not have an impact. You'll have people from coming in, you understand? But then people from up who are supposed to make the laws, who are supposed to come up with the changes, people who are supposed to implement these laws when they don't know anything. The police, you need already the professionals who are there to understand what cybersecurity is. So this kind of trainings, what Dr. Kemi has said is that, first of all, you're not going to get a policeman who has carried out investigations for, I don't know, who has 20 years experience to go back in school and, study, get into a core, cybersecurity course. But there could be some trainings to help them with the experience they have and give them some kind of knowledge to equip them so that they can do actually a better work. I am 41 years. I'm not going to, I have had 18 years experience. Very few people my age would want to go back that route and, okay, now which cyber security course am I taking? I already have like 3 PhDs or rather 3 master's degrees. That you have to understand the realities of the world. And also who are the people who are going to change, actually the change makers. Do we have any professionals there? Anyway, I never like to complain. So what do I do? What can we do? Or what have I done? One of the things is that it's so difficult right now to even to have this kind of trainings in mainstream schools. Like, for example, now for me as a lawyer, in our universities, these courses they're not even talked about. So there we can come up with alternative schools. I'm sure Confidence you're into cybersecurity awareness. There could be training. I started an academy with a couple of colleagues from the continent, where we collaborate with the Stellenbosch University and University in Maryland in the US. We're trying to build capacity on the continent, but we're not only targeting young people. We want to target, a cross section of professionals. That is when you'll have an impact. Otherwise, you might, I don't know. But also even when I think about it, you're talking about the people you're training. Again, it's still that like 2%. Yet this problem is actually affecting so many people on the continent. So there's an increased use of the internet. You said that. So many people are using it. Are they aware? Do they even know what they're dealing with? I think there's definitely a very, very big gap.
Thank you very much, Alice. I'm seeing a hand up, or was that a mistake? Salim.
Yeah,
Rock.
just to wrap it up. I wanted to say something, but I think she just mentioned something.
All right, thank you. Salim, just 1 minute.
Just 1 minute, okay.
from all we've had is it's simple. So what are we trying to say here? Synergy between the academia, synergy between the cyber security sphere, synergy in the government, the policy makers, the National Assembly, because I'm not sure if in this country we have a very excellent SOC center. You can do security as a service, outsource that. Somebody that is an expert will do that. You'd focus on your business and it's go to market, and it's all cloud solutions and all everything being a service for you. So in terms of operating a SOC, the experts that are there will be there, whereas the people that make the policies, the people that make the academia, knowledge sharing, and all will all work together. And I think with that, we can have a very good structural attack system that will function effectively.
Thank you very much. From this discussion, I can see certain things cutting across. One is implementation, implementing the law, implementing cybersecurity measures. Then another thing is synergy. You need to create synergy between the cybersecurity professionals and the academics and the DPAs, the government. We all have to work hand in hand if we actually want to make things work, particularly in the digital economy. So the last talking point will be where our panelists will have to give their final words because we are almost out of time. So the talking point is, how can data protection impact the digital economy? I think this is very broad. So I will need our speakers to narrow it down as much as possible. This is probably the topic all over again, just rephrased as a question. So this will be our last words on the topic. How can data protection impact the economy now? Because we probably have 7 minutes left. So when I say 1 minute, I mean 1 minute. Thank you very much. So I'll start with Alice. Alice, are you available? Last words. Okay, over to you, Kemi. You're on mute, please.
Okay, all right. So what would it be to ensure that the digital economy thrives? I repeat what I said at the beginning: be pro-right and be pro-innovation, because I think Africa is lost in a bubble. We are stuck in this bubble where we think that by implementing data protection laws, we have fulfilled all righteousness. And I think Aissatou mentioned it. It's all right if we have the laws and everybody can go home saying my privacy is protected, even though effectively you can't do anything. You don't have the rights that you can meaningfully exercise, and nobody is overseeing or ensuring that those rights that the law handed over to you is being enforced. So I say balance the law, be pro-right, be pro-innovation, and make sure there is a better understanding. We need to make sure at the continental level that people actually understand what a data protection law should do, what it does, and generally educate people in this area and ensure that the law does not overburden businesses. Because in Africa, we are saying we want to move to the front of the row in terms of the digital economy. We have the people, we have the resources. So how do we do that? If we keep putting ourselves at the back by not joining the global conversation on how things should be done correctly. Yeah, so those are my parting words.
Thank you very much. So we have to be pro-rights and pro-economy, pro-development, even when enacting data protection laws. Over to you, Alice. Your last words, how data protection impacts the digital economy.
I think we have to work together. We definitely have to collaborate and find some kind of a middle ground. Definitely, like I gave an example I gave. all these things could mean completely different things in our, culturally, and where we are in terms of economic status. But definitely we can find a middle ground and come up with definitions that have meaning for all of us, like similar meanings rather for all of us on the continent. And also working, collaborating with the international, at international level, global platforms. Like, why? Because we are dealing with something that has no jurisdiction. You have hackers from China, hackers from Japan. How do you deal with them? One of my clients was based in the US and hacked by what they call it, had a cyber crime matter against a Nigerian guy who was trading on one of the crypto companies in Uganda and Nigeria. But you understand, he is in the US. This is a guy in Nigeria who is defrauded him. So both jurisdictions have to work together. For me, I think I found that actually it's extremely important for us to work together and collaborate. So these kind of platforms are great for us to benchmark and understand what you're doing in your jurisdiction, how we can actually work together to make sure that we, I think, definitely come up with either a regulatory environment or come up with practical solutions.
Thank you so much, Alice. So Alice, your point is synergy, middle ground, working together between professionals and between governments, countries, and internationally. Over to you, Rock, your final words.
All right, thank you. For me, it's clear because first, I think data protection laws needs to be updated as technology evolves. And why am I saying so is because you can't be using data protection laws for 5 years back to oversee modern technologies or technologies of the future. And I give a practical instance. Before Windows 10 was Windows Vista, was Windows 8, you could not create a hotspot from your laptop to extend your corporate network with your mobile phones. But with Windows 10 now, you can do that. And that poses a lot of vulnerabilities to almost all African organizations relying on Microsoft to conduct business. And as I'm talking to you, as we're having this meeting, I've just received a notification on my taskbar. I'm sure if you go to your Windows updates now in this meeting, you're going to see Microsoft announcing, get ready to install Windows 11. And if you click on that link, it's going to bring you a new operating system that is going to give us a new, different kind of vulnerabilities. So what would data protection experts do? They have to upskill. They have to learn how these new technologies are going to affect we the people and how to create better laws to protect our data. Because most times you get amazed at the level of database marketing that goes on with with people's information without their knowledge, without their consent. That's one. Secondly, to complement what Alice rightly said, that there was also a use case where a ransomware issue occurred, and there's a company called Chain Analysis in the US. That company is one of the very, very few companies that has been able to track Bitcoin sales and Bitcoin remittances. And
summarize and
yeah, so let me paint it. Why it's good for me to stress is I will be very brief, but it's important I give you that use case because cybersecurity is broad. And we on the technical side, we can tell you that you can be calling cybersecurity, but if you're not careful, you'll be mixing different things together and calling it one name. In ransomware specifically, in that case, they paid for, that was even the colonial attack, they paid $4.4 million. Where did this money go to? You know, Bitcoin is difficult for you to track cryptocurrency, but with even American government, as sophisticated as they are, they will not be able to track them without using that private firm, Chain Analysis, which worked with their tax regulatory agency. And they were able to trace how those cyber criminals were able to convert that cryptocurrency into cash. Now, if, like what Alice just mentioned, if we are suffering from the same vector, the same technique in Africa, why can't we just resort to international collaboration to track how these people get these funds, use these funds, convert these funds? That's where international collaboration comes in. And that's where AU needs to come in. That's where Nigeria needs to come to the forefront to work with these collaborators. And like she rightly said, sets a benchmark for this thing to take place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So your point is the law should keep up with technology, and data protection officers and cybersecurity professionals should keep up with technology. Before you give your final word, there's a question here in the task, but I think we're in the chat box. I think it has been answered, but just to re-emphasize, is it not just easier for Africa to adopt the GDPR as is instead of trying to customize privacy laws to fit its peculiarity? So I understand we've said things around this, but just to be specific and to clarify, I'll need you to answer this question and then give your final words. Is it not just easier for Africa to just adopt the GDPR as is instead of trying to customize privacy laws to fit its peculiarity?
As a general answer, I think it might be good to look at what happens when a European constitution is copied and pasted to Africa, and look at the state of stability that happens in Africa. I think Africa is mature enough to look at their own reality and make up their own laws. And this is not dogmatic, this is just a practical point of view. The reality in Europe and the reality in Africa are totally different. Therefore, even though GDPR has some great principles and some practical, I would say, in many ways, GDPR can be more practical than some African laws, but not all of them. I do think that from an African perspective, we need to look at the reality. For example, the requirement for a DPO, for data protection officer, that has more knowledge than the average data protection authority, to me, is not realistic in Africa. So, and also the data protection laws should be, I believe in Africa, should look at two key things. The first key element is that Africa has very little servers and data centers on the continent, which means that the data will go to other countries. This will change. This is changing, but at the moment this is the case. So this has to be addressed. Whereas in Europe, we have data centers everywhere, but we tend to go to America even despite that, to sell our data. So the reality is different. We're looking at a continent that has a very small number of data centers that gets the data, including non-personal data, including key strategic government data being hosted in other countries. Without talking about data sovereignty and localization, this is something that should be addressed as well, because today in Africa, half of the countries that have data protection laws have laws that only apply to the people, to the data controllers that are based in Africa. And those laws don't even apply to the companies, to the organizations that actually process the hugest quantities of data. So I think that'd be one priority when it comes to data protection. The second one is that data protection laws in Africa should really look at the fact that most data processors are small organizations, very small organization, and there's a huge amount of informal trade in Africa. So in that way, I don't think GDPR will be suited at all for Africa, for the African reality. You're on mute. You're still on mute, Victor.
Thank you for pointing that out. I think that was a very comprehensive answer. Does anybody have anything to add? Because there's still another question, two questions that are basically saying the same thing. How do organizations see data protection as a value rather than a regulatory requirement? And how do organizations comply with data protection laws? What tools are out there to ensure all the elements of privacy laws are adhered to? Will anyone like to answer?
Yeah, I will start off I'll start off with how they see it as a value point. So that's a very interesting question that I also cut across to cybersecurity as well. I think a great way to see from the lens of value will be how it enables the business. So, for example, taking on or having great data protection and enforcing it within the organization definitely helps for your business to scale. So if you don't have those things in place, for example, there are jurisdictions where your business may not be able to do business in. So it enables your business to be able to do, to be able to provide value to your consumers. And it could also be a marketing point, if I was bringing it out to the angle. If, for example, your data protection game is high, that could be a point where you actually reassure your customers to give you their data. It could be a point where you can actually increase confidence. And some of the points I put down here when I was planning to respond to your previous question was around the fact that increased confidence in the digital economy, increased confidence in data protection practices of organizations can actually grow adoption of their products, and of course grow digital economy generally speaking. So if you can have that mindset in place where you see data protection as an enabler for your business to thrive, then it changes whether or not you perceive it as a constraint or you perceive it as something that is just regulation. So I think that's where I will be coming from.
Thank you very much, Confidence. So I'm going to take this last question, and it's on research data protection. So I'm going to be directing this question at Adekemi. I'm going to read it. It's quite lengthy. One aspect of data protection that I may say has not been properly addressed here is research data protection. This is important in trade considerations because research is an integral part of any sector. There is a huge lacuna in knowledge of data handling in research dimensions. Data manipulation and all other manner of unethical practices in handling of data for research purposes has actually killed the validity of research output in this part of the world. Is there anything in place to address this within the framework of what we are discussing today?
Okay, so I don't know what, I'm not quite sure what the question wants us to address, but I think if it's about research data is covered under the data protection laws that I know of, subject to certain exceptions. If you are handling personal data when you do research, you are subject to, certain restrictions about use and transfer. So when you do research and you collect personal data, you're still supposed to comply with certain provisions of the law. Off of my head, I don't know which exact exceptions apply and which exact provisions, but this is covered. Scientific data, research data is all covered to the best of my knowledge, by data protection laws. So if people don't comply, that's a different thing, but it is covered. The law, NDPR, the GDPR that I've seen all mentioned, and they cover research data. And I mean, of course, ethics is a completely different question, if I may say, I mean, how you handle data is an ethical issue, but I think this is touching on broader ethical concerns than actually, handling data itself. It's talking about manipulating the data and things like that, which I think, it's not strictly a data protection issue, right?
Another panel and for another discussion.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I don't think I said to have given a last word, then Salim, then Confidence, and I think we can call it a wrap after that. 1 minute each. So last word, Salim.
For me, basically, when you say digital economy at the moment, you are talking of money. So if the banks will definitely go haywire with all the current infrastructure available, install firewalls, they spend hugely capitally and operationally on installing things to protect the money, then I see no reason why data protection should not be a household name within the Nigerian economy, in the private sector and the public sector. Because at the moment, when you want to do card business as a institution, the first thing you hear about is are you PCI DSS certified, which is a certification that permits you to do card business. So the first questions in organizations nowadays, both private and public, should be, are you NDPR certified before I do business with you? That's all from me.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Aisha, to your final word.
So to ensure that data protection enables development from a tech perspective, I believe that data protection law and data protection alone shouldn't be sufficient. And when we talk about law, the law itself, as we said many times today, in itself is of little use if it's not implemented. Something we didn't talk about is the infrastructure. If there is no infrastructure, we depend on third parties that are not based in Africa. So building the infrastructure, building the submarine cables, having the data centers will be a great step forward, and having that could really help the population at large. And I'm going to finish with one example. If I spend 1 week in Mali, which is the country of birth of my parents, I will spend 50 euros just using the internet for 1 week. Whereas here in France, I'll spend those 50 euros in 3 months using the internet. So the technology has to be accessible to everybody, and the law can accompany that growth as well.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Over to you, Confidence.
Okay, so I'm just going to share two reasons or ways that data protection can actually impact the digital economy. I think that was a question, right?
Yes.
Okay, so, and I'm going to share that really quickly using a story I was sharing with, a real life story I was sharing with my CISO friends across the banks. My mother recently opened a bank account in one of the banks, and the day after she opened the bank account, she started getting calls from all sorts of people trying to defraud her. That's a day after. Those calls haven't stopped. And so I was, if not for the fact that she's of course my mother, which means I've done my charity at home first. I mean, that's a new customer coming into the banking industry, space, and trying to adopt technology, and is actually having this experience. So I was having that conversation to pay behind, and I'm just bringing that up because one of the key ways that data protection can actually help the digital economies, it can increase the confidence, consumer confidence, and of course that will build trust in the digital economy and grow adoption. So if, for example, someone like my mother is defrauded, the chances that she'll come back and run their bank account is very, very low. She'll say, please, 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 I want to return to my POS, we're sending the money through. So that's what could happen to new entrants, and that's the thing with data protection as well, and adoption of all the other new digital platforms. We want people to be doing Osusu using an app. We want people to be saving using an app. We want people to be doing all sorts using an app. We need to ensure that we're taking data protection very seriously, of course, with cybersecurity together. Second and last point I want to raise is that when data protection is taken seriously, and cybersecurity, of course, we will be able to drive the decline of cyber fraud. The reason people can call you over the phone and give you some sort of information about yourself that builds trust as a backdrop to begin the attacks on you is because there's a loophole. There's somewhere where that data is coming from. So we need to be able to plug those loopholes to not aid crime, because when that information is shared, when there's even context, the chances that you can fall for a social engineering attack is very high. And so that's also a place where data protection being done right actually helps the digital economy. It actually helps us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll send a big thank you to our panelists. So my takeaway from our final words is that we should be in discussing data protection, in making data protection laws. We should be pro human rights and pro economy. There should be a synergy between professionals and between nations and at the international level. That data protection actually increases confidence, and this increase in confidence can help grow the economy, and that the law should keep up with technology and professionals should constantly keep up with technology. Then also people should grow their skills, professionals should grow their skills, get certifications. But I would like to point out here that not just certifications, but we should concentrate on the knowledge that comes with these certifications. And then finally, there should be implementation. I think we've spoken about this over and over, but it cannot be overflowed. It's not enough to talk. It's not enough to have laws. It's not enough to have policies. We need to put in place implementation measures and implement this. And technology has to be accessible so that the law can go with it. Thank you very much. I've learned so much from this distinguished panel. Thank you for your time. We've spent almost 2 hours discussing, but as I said at the beginning, we can go on and on and on and on this topic, and it's important to keep having these conversations. Thank you so much for your time. I think that will be all for this panel session. I think a recording will be made available, and if you have any further questions, you can send to the email made available by the organizers. So thank you for your time, and over to you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, thank you.
We have come to the end of the panel sessions for the second Africa Data Security Conclave conversations. I'm sure you will all agree that it has been an engaging one, very insightful and exciting. We have learned a lot. Valuable insights have been shared by our diverse panelists. We really would like to appreciate all of our panelists, our moderators, our sponsors. Thank you so much for your time. We do not take it for granted. To catch up with the recordings for these sessions, we would like you to visit our website. It will be shared in the chat. And if you also have questions yet to be answered, you can also forward them to the email that will be dropped in the chat box. I remain your host. Thank you for having me. I'm Stella Chinyere Uwetre. The closing remark for this year's conclave will be given by no other person but Michael Olubenga Shile, the Africa Data Security Conclave Communications Conference Lead, who also doubles as the Executive Director of Operations Taxi Technology, one of our headline sponsors. Over to you, Michael Olubenga Shile.
Yes, thank you very much, Stella. Please, can I confirm that I'm audible? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, then. Thank you very much. So yes, my name is Michael Olubenga Shile, and I'll just be giving a closing remarks for this event. So must thank every one of you, all our participants from across Africa, of course, mostly from Nigeria and the rest of Africa for attending this conference. I thank all the panelists, all our speakers across the 4 panel sessions. This was very insightful. I trust that everyone who attended this could actually say that, yes, it was well worth the time. So the conversations continue. We're not stopping there. We have our regular reports, our quarterly reports. That's the Africa Data Security Reports, the quarterly publication from the desk of the Africa Data Security Conclave. And we had the first edition in January, the second one was in April, and the third one was in July. So you could catch up on you could download these materials at your convenience. I mean, the links have been shared already with you via email. You could download all these materials and catch up further. And the next one will be coming out this October.
which interestingly will actually compile most of the resolutions and the conversations from this particular conclave. So if you missed it, or if you've missed most of the conversations, look forward to reading our material. That is the Africa Data Security Report by October. That will be the 4th edition of its kind. Of course, the links will be shared to you. We have your details already. We will send all these relevant links and all these relevant communication details. Thank you very much to all our sponsors, the headline sponsors of this event, 21 Search, Tax Aid Technology Limited, Tax Tech, Tax Aid Professional Services Limited, TGL, AO2 Law. AO2 Law have been gracious enough to even give us their space to actually, beam this directly from. Thank you very much, AO2 Law, and all our other partners and all our other supporters. We have needs that I can't remember all the names right now, but this definitely will be reaching out to you, all of you individually. Thank you also once again to all our panelists and all our speakers. We'll definitely be reaching out to you with your award plaques for being a part of this conclave. Thank you very much, every one of you. And of course, if you remember, if you also want to, further your knowledge on data protection, we have a training arm that is the NDP Academy, one of our co-sponsors, of course, as well, where you could actually take any of our courses, the practitioner course or the foundation course. The foundation course is a basic course that just allows you have, a broader knowledge of data protection, while the practitioner course takes you further into the nitty-gritty of data protection, especially from the angle of the NDPR, the GDPR, and all the regulations across the world. We look forward to seeing you again next year. This ends the 2nd Africa Data Security Conclave. We promised you it was going to be an annual event. We had the first one last year. This is the second, which I think has been an amazing success. We look forward to seeing you again at the 3rd Africa Data Security Conclave. Make sure you keep the date. I assume the date again should be sometime around October 13th and 14th, just like we have 14th and 15th this year. Last year was 15th and 16th. So we'll communicate the dates to you anyway in case of any changes, but please stay tuned. And don't forget also to join any of our quarterly trainings on the NDP Academy. We have our trainings 4 times in a year. It's a quarterly training as well. The next one is also going to be November 18 and 19 this year. Please stay tuned and reach out to us for any information you need, any clarifications. You have our emails already showing on the screen previously, and of course, will be shared again and again to you. We look forward to hearing from you again. Thank you very much, everyone, for being a part of the Africa Data Security Conclave #2, the second one, of course. We appreciate every one of you, and we look forward to continue these conversations and indeed ensuring a fully data secured and data compliant Africa. God bless you. We'll see you next year. Bye.